This is going to be a little bit of a sort of a palate cleanser, I suppose, isn't it? This
Yeah.
one, a little bit different, considering that we spoke for nearly 4 hours combined about the Joker.
Yeah, and I'm basically now at the point where I'm like, what the hell? I'm probably going to end up, co-authoring or pulling together a book about it. So,
Yeah, so it's gonna get even deeper, that particular rabbit hole, isn't it?
well, I think that's the point, isn't it? At the point at which you realise, like, I'm not going to get this covered in a single essay. I'm not going to get this
Nah,
covered in a 4-hour podcast.
absolutely not. We could have
There's
gone on, couldn't we? We could
well,
have gone on so easily.
I mean, we could record one a week for a while, to be honest. But I think at that point you might as well go proper long form and get the
Yeah,
words out. So.
yeah, to do a thesis on it or something to that effect, a book. Why not?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've already spoken to a couple of people as well as you good self and Jack, and I've got
Absolutely.
so far. I tell you what's really nice, and this is in fitting with the. Sorry, I know we're actually not going to talk about Joker today, but we are
Apparently
doing.
not.
But what's nice is what I will say just briefly about that is what's very fitting for me in keeping with that, with the nature of the film itself, is that so far every person I spoke to has come back with a completely different angle that they want to explore.
That's great.
Which
That's
just,
really cool.
I think, just speaks to the enormous strength of what that film is. Really, that it's eliciting that many responses from people.
I would be really interested to get someone whose perspectives are antipodean to ours, who hated the film, who thought that it was execrable for whatever reason. I would really like to see that interpretation. I'd like to see where they go with it and where they derive those criticisms from. I think it would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I haven't seen that yet. I have seen a couple of people who feel that it's good but not brilliant. I've seen a couple
Yep,
of those,
I've
which is
seen a couple of
interesting.
those, which is fine. I mean, what I have seen a lot of is that there's a lot of people who are viewing it from the perspective of people who are fans of the comic books and of the
Yeah.
comic book, the interpretations of the comic books, and that seems to be where a lot of the principal criticism derives from. I.e., it's not a film about that. It's
Well,
not a film about the comic books, and it's
it,
not going to go on to spawn a franchise or like a new. It's not going to become the new Batman or anything like that.
no, it's not the Killing Joke. It's not as we laughed about on our chat with Jack. It's not immediately or indeed remotely apparent how this would tie into a Robert Pattinson Batman.
No.
Um, or
Nor
indeed
do we want it to.
no, or indeed how it could have anything to do with the wider DC cinematic universe. Really, it feels like as we described it, a cul-de-sac, which I think is right. But I mean, a glorious,
Yeah,
wonderful.
at its most ideal, I think. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure I read recently that Joaquin Phoenix has already signed on for another film.
Well, I mean that's as inevitable as it is ill-advised, given the success. It's just become, by the way, the since we last spoke, it's now the highest-grossing R-rated movie of all time.
So I understand. So I
So
understand, which is really
it's
interesting.
yeah, which
It's
means a sequel was as inevitable as it is pointless.
of
Although they
course.
proved me wrong with this one, so maybe they'll prove me
Yep.
wrong again. Who knows? Maybe
Who
Joker
knows?
2 will be fantastic. But
If they can pull that off,
if
and
they land
make
that,
it,
I will be incredibly impressed. It
there
doesn't
will
feel
be
likely, but
something miraculous going on with this
yeah.
franchise. There'll be some sort of, I don't know, cinematic deity looking over it and making sure that it works. Some
Yeah.
incarnation of the Greek media.
But
You
you know
know,
what, though? I do think it is important to take this moment, before the inevitable disappointment, or almost inevitable disappointment of a sequel, to say, we have this moment. Whatever
yeah,
happens, we had 2019. We got to go to the cinema and see this thing. We got our minds blown.
absolutely.
They can't take that
Absolutely.
away from us.
No, they can't. No, they can't. I mean, it does happen, doesn't it? I mean, for
Mm.
fuck's sake, there are sequels to Donnie Darko out there.
Mm.
I mean, of all the films that never warranted a sequel ever, and that actively refutes the very notion of a sequel in its mythology.
Yeah.
It's absurd. Something I generally don't mind people trying to continue a franchise. I don't believe that, like, even bad sequels ruin the experience of a previous film. I don't really believe that. But there
No.
are certain franchises that, because of the natures of their mythology, they actually do. And one of them is Terminator.
Yeah.
After Terminator 2, the very existence of other films destroys that franchise. The
Yeah, I
reason
agree.
the reason it destroys the franchise is because, or the very fact that there are Terminators after the events of Terminator 2 makes all of that pain, all of that sacrifice, all of that suffering, all of that emotion completely pointless.
Yeah, that's right. And also, I mean, Terminator actually, I mean, the original movie could stand alone. If they'd
Yeah,
never made a sequel, it would have worked perfectly well. Terminator
absolutely.
2 does build enough on what happens in Terminator 1 to actually make it, because what they do with Terminator 2 is they bake in the events of Terminator to
Yeah,
create a rationale for Terminator 2, and
that's
actually
right.
it's quite, I think it's quite smart how
It
how
works
they pull that
fine.
off with the
It
storytelling.
does.
Yeah.
But after Terminator 2, it's done.
Well, they beat it. They did what they needed
They
to
beat
do.
Judgment Day.
Yeah.
That's the point, isn't it? That's the point for all of this pain. And boy, do those characters go through a lot of pain.
Right.
It makes the suffering essential. It makes it necessary. But the very existence of a Terminator 3, whether it was any good or not, and it's not, it's absolutely terrible.
Spoilers, you guys. It
Yeah,
sucks.
execrably bad film.
Yeah.
Just makes Terminator 2 hollow. It actually hollows out that film. And it's really sad. The only way to watch them is to just ignore the fact that there are sequels after Terminator 2. Just ignore them.
Well, funnily enough, in the same way that I live in a pocket universe where there was only ever one Robocop movie and no sequels or adaptations or deviations from that source material.
I always feel sad for the Robocop sequels because, the second one in particular, it has good things in it.
Well, theoretically, if such a sequel were to exist, I might be able to agree with that. But the
There
point is,
are
like,
grains of good ideas,
yeah.
but just awfully handled. I mean, just terribly, terribly handled.
I mean, Frank Miller did not yet know how to write a movie script, for starters.
Clearly.
Just to pick
Clearly.
one. I mean, it's a classic example of a few good ideas adding up to actually less than the sum of its parts in terms of what gets
it's
delivered.
a real shame because there are things about it I like. I like the Kane robot. I like the idea of this drug dealer being sort of somehow inserted into this military grade robot, I think that's quite a cool idea. But it's just so rhythmically it's all off, tonally it's all over the place, the cinematography's awful. It's just a bad film, it's a bad film. But the thing is, Robocop is one of those films where it could have spawned a decent franchise. There could have been good films. There could have been good sequels to that franchise.
I mean, potentially. I think that you'd need to. It's funny. We just did a watching Robocop I just did one with Jack Graham, and we did discuss this. And one of the things we kind of came with, like, if you're going to do a sequel to Robocop, I think one of your central challenges are, if you're going to stay true to the character, the visor would have to stay off for the entire second movie, because once he's removed it, he's crossed a certain Rubicon. He can't cross back again.
No, exactly.
And yet it's so baked into the iconography of the character that a Robocop 2 that didn't feature him in the helmet would also feel very strange. So I think there are challenges with the second. You'd have to go quite gonzo, I think, to make the second movie work. You'd have to be quite uncompromising. But it could be done. Of course it could be done. And funnily enough, I was toying with this. I've been chucking it over the last few days. The idea, I think, my central moment of revelation in a Robocop 2. So the moment where he goes to arrest Dick Jones in Robocop.
Yep.
And Directive 4 flashes up. So my pivotal moment in Robocop 2 is where he faces a situation where he has a conflict between Directive 2, protect the innocent, and Directive 3, uphold the law.
Yeah.
And he's forced to choose between those two. And that, for me, would be like the pivotal moment in the movie, I think.
It's difficult, isn't it? Especially when but there's lots of potential there, particularly because of course at the end of Robocop 1 he sort of shrugged off this vast controlling corporate culture. And he knows at that point that it is corrupt.
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? He does know it's corrupt, but he hasn't shrugged off the programming. He had to get old man to fire Dick Jones in order to complete the arrest, or, execution, really. That's exactly where I think the tension in Part 2 comes from.
In fact, I think the fun of it would be him becoming more than he is.
Yeah, absolutely.
It would be him evolving back towards being kind of human.
Yeah, or trying to, and whether or not that's even possible, considering how much of him has been left behind on the operating table.
It's not much.
Well, this is it. I mean, it's quite, there's a whole kind of thing you could explore there, and it could still be a gangbusters action movie as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Scope for that, but,
well, the existentialism of Robocop is interesting anyway, isn't it? I always love that stuff about, how much is it Murphy, how much is it is it a conflict of the programming or an imperfection in the programming? I love that stuff. I think that's really cool.
Well,
it's the cyberpunk stuff. Cyberpunk asks those questions all the time, usually with reference to like upgraded humans. So, if you happen to have some sort of upgrade in your mind that somehow expands its processing capacity or something to that effect, to what degree is it you? still, or to what degree does that alter the very notion of who or what you are? It's all really cool. It's all really fun. I love that stuff.
But the difference, I think, with most cyberpunk stories and Robocop, which makes Robocop gives it a different valence, is the fact that in Robocop, Murphy has no agency, he has no choice about what happens to him.
Yeah,
it's forced upon him by an outside structure. And actually, in that sense, it's more about the medical, ethical dilemmas of, how, under what circumstances do we preserve life? At what point does it count as preservation of life as opposed to preservation of misery? Or, there's an incredibly dense, ethically grey, very genuinely difficult moral area there.
Well, what if they start applying the same principles to other jobs? So what if you have all of these sort of like pseudo-human cyborg accountants wired into their machines, who just endlessly process, who have slight engrams of who they used to be flashing through their minds, but don't even have any of the agency that Robocop does. They're like wired into what they do. That would be kind of fun to play with, wouldn't it? Like the entire transformation of culture through this technology, or what it means to be human.
No, absolutely. But I think also I'm just really interested in the ethics of the unresolved conversation. Robocop is to what degree is Murphy human after the transformation? And he doesn't know any more than anybody else. I mean, he has that. I think one of the great lines in cinema history, I can feel them, but I can't remember them, when he's discussing his family, which is such a great, it's incredibly evocative line. The way he delivers it is wonderful, but it leaves open, I mean, that begs 1,000 philosophical and narrative questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one, I love the fact that the film doesn't try to answer it.
Oh no,
I
God no.
I really like that.
Yeah, it just leaves him.
Like
and I think I would like a second movie that explores that more, but preserves that central mystery of is Murphy a ghost in a machine, or is he actually, something we would recognise as human and not? I mean, there's no need to resolve that.
No, there isn't. And it would be fundamentally dishonest to do so anyway, because there isn't an answer to that.
No, but keep asking the question, because by asking the question and exploring it, you are going to reveal some really interesting stuff, I think.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Just because there isn't an answer, it doesn't mean that the question isn't worthwhile.
Right.
Yeah, because it allows you to explore concepts and to expand your own mind,
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that I mean, I know we started talking about the Joker and we started talking about Robocop, but actually, we do have another subject for this evening, Kit.
Indeed. Dear listeners, as you'll have gathered from what you've just heard, we are here to talk about The Thief of Always.
Yeah, as was obvious. What's with the comments asking like, oh, haven't you already talked about this? What are you talking about? It's obvious what we were going to lead into. I mean, Joker, Robocop, Thief of Always. It's obvious. I mean, who doesn't
trilogy.
get that? Jeez. God.
So this one's interesting because this was on. So we talked about doing a series for quite a while, and we did a couple of. You came on my show a couple of times. I came on Strange Playgrounds a couple of times. We talked about various things.
Oh, so much more than I remember actually. And when I go back and look, there's way more. There's Hellbound. There's It. There's The Binding of Isaac, which you posted on Twitter recently, which has made me go back and play it again.
You're welcome.
I uploaded a video today to two actually, because I had to cut it in half to the Exaggerated Elegy channel of a very good run.
Oh, superb.
Was it good? It was good because I didn't think it was going to be until right near the end.
Oh, that's great.
And then something happened, and it was like, I've won. I got the Guppy transformation just by sheer fluke.
Oh, yes.
Complete fluke. And it was like, no, I've won. That's it. This run is going to be brilliant from now on.
Yeah.
Anywho.
So we had a bunch of those, and we talked. I mean, there was quite an early one on Desperation and the Regulators, which I really enjoyed as well.
Of course. Apart from It, we haven't really returned to King. We're going to have to do that.
We will. It'll happen. It's fine.
Definitely.
But then we hit on the idea of what the hell is wrong with us, and we wanted to talk about. I mean, the basic idea is it's not exclusively necessarily childhood influences, but it's certainly about shared cultural artifacts. The things that really kind of get us going. And it's nice because it's elastic enough. We talk about video games, we talk about music as well as books and
Certainly
movies.
do.
So, we cast the net as wide as we possibly can. And we've got, not to give too much away, we've got some upcoming episodes on, I think, most forms of media at some point or another.
Pretty much, yeah.
I know we want to talk about Pink Floyd at some point. We want to talk about King Kong. We want to talk about, there's loads of different things we want to get into. But this one was, as soon as we started batting ideas back and forth, this one was on the list from the beginning. And the only reason we haven't covered it sooner was basically because I wanted to reread it.
Yeah, and you're going to have an entire dimension of experience with this book that I don't have as a result of that rereading, because I believe that you reread this with your daughter, yeah?
So actually I've reread this book twice in very quick succession over the last couple of months, because I got it for my birthday in June. I read it to myself because for the first time in 20 plus years.
So yeah, quite a while.
And partly I was doing that for this, and partly as a vetting process to see if it would actually be suitable for my 9-year-old.
Considering that it's written by Clive Barker.
This is it, and the thing is, I read it, and we should get to this. So I read it as a teenager, or possibly my early 20s, and I remember at that point thinking, this is in no way suitable for children. Like, this is it's called a kid's book, but like, fuck off with that. This is really scary. But what I have since learned, having become a parent myself, is what I think you forget at that period in your life that you can sometimes recall. It's actually like, kids can take a lot more than you think they can.
Well, I think this is a massively fair point, and it's something that's very, very relevant to this book. Adults generally forget the experience of being children. Yeah. They think they remember, and they don't. They really don't. You only have to look at the sort of winsome nostalgia for childhood that people exercise, which is a total delusion. Yep. By the way, people tend to assume that when you were a child, things were easy, things were, everything was this sun-drenched summertime, or everything was wonderful, or it was Christmases or whatever, and it's just not true. People don't seem to remember the anxieties, the nightmares, because reality is often very elastic to children, and they haven't yet really learned what is absolute about reality. Everything is quite scary. There are potential horrors in the world, as well as potential fantasies and wonders. So every shadow, every corner, reality is not still or set. And you have, of course, not only that, but you have numerous sublimated anxieties that you can't work through as a child, that you don't really understand, and that often inform the way you perceive the world and inform the way you behave. Childhood is a really scary, frightening time, even when it's a good childhood.
Yeah, that's right. And I think part of that is there's also the fact that certainly for the first few years, everything you encounter, you're literally experiencing for the first time, almost everything. So, the plus side of that is that basically everything's brilliant.
Everything's wonderful.
Every film is brilliant. Every piece of music is brilliant. Every book is brilliant, because you're not yet aware of such things as narrative tropes or season arcs in TV shows, so everything is just brand new and mind blowing. Yep. And that's wonderful. It's wonderful to be around as an adult, to watch a kid. There was a point in Scarlett's stuff, I could put her in front of basically any piece of media, and it would blow her mind, and she would love it. And that's great. Actually, that's a really... this is a bit of a digression, but as a storyteller, it's actually quite useful to be around that energy for a little while.
Yeah. Of course.
Because it helps you, or it helped me anyway, a bit with some of my own insecurities about my work, about this. Because, this was a thing about originality and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It's quite nice to be reminded, no, there's always a market for just a fun story, a good story well told.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be reinventing the wheel. If you just do it well, then you'll find people... And
absolutely.
It'll make it'll find an audience, and also it'll spread a bit of joy, and Jesus, what are we here for,
So,
that's been a really positive experience. But you're right, the flip side of that is also kind of everything is scary.
Yeah, and everything is newly scary as well. Just as everything is newly wonderful, that fear, that fright is the first experience of that fear and that fright that you will have. And therefore will define all the others that come after, People forget the ambiguity of childhood. That's the problem.
Well, that's the thing. It's scary. The reason the world is so scary as a child is the flip side of that wonder. It's because nothing makes any sense.
Nothing makes sense, and there's no there's no solidity, is there? There's
No.
no context by which to define things. So just because you have this particular experience, like you open the door to the upstairs or to the hall this time, and the hall or the upstairs is out there this time, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be there or the same the next time.
Yeah, and also everything is arbitrary.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything is arbitrary around you. Like, things fall when you drop them. Why?
Yeah.
You wake up the next morning, your parents are there. Okay, they're there today. But there's no, and actually parents don't fucking help because we're arbitrary. Suddenly, there are all these rules.
Yeah.
And you don't know why they're there. You get shouted at if you don't do them, or you get told off if you don't do them, or you get to not play on your iPad if you don't do them. But you don't really know, why in a more general sense the rules are what they are.
The logic often doesn't make sense to a child, does
No.
it? It just doesn't make sense. Well, why?
Well, sometimes, full disclosure, it doesn't make much sense to the adults. You find
That's
yourself
absolutely
speaking
true.
the words of your parents out your mouth, and you're like, wait a minute, what the fuck?
and then you stop, and
Yeah,
think,
exactly. Well, if you're lucky, you catch yourself. You're like, what
you
the
catch yourself
why
and
am I doing
like,
this?
yeah, what am I doing? This didn't make sense to me as a child. It didn't work with me as a child. Why am I doing it?
Oh, God, parenthood's fucking weird. Anyway. But yeah, so the point is like kids, but you're right. The flip side of all that, or the kind of lesser from all that is kids have a resilience you don't expect because everything's still new. They're still malleable, so they can adjust to new realities quite quickly. Now there's a part of that that's terrifying. Actually, one of the things I was trying to capture when I was writing the Finite was that feeling of like, one of the things I think that makes that book horrifying is Charlie's mute acceptance of a change of circumstances that are utterly horrific.
Well, I mean, it's actually really interesting because it has great fidelity in the book to reality because that is how children are.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, don't get me wrong, all traumatic situations will always leave their mark and they will create contexts that may be actually quite damaging later down the line.
Yes.
But they do, in the immediate functional sense, children can adapt to pretty horrific and traumatic situations really quickly.
Yeah. No, that's actually a good point. I mean, if Charlie had made it to a 30, she'd be a basket case. But in the moment, they adjust.
I mean, in my day-to-day work, because I work with people with learning difficulties and whatnot, and I have worked with children in that regard. And what part of that job is we study things like abuse, like trauma and whatnot, because it's quite prevalent in these areas. We're working with vulnerable people. And one of the things you do learn, start to realize is how when children are like in say an abusive situation with their parents or whatever, they're in an abusive household, like physically, emotionally, whatever, they adapt to those circumstances for better or for worse. They come up with coping mechanisms, they create their own pocket realities in which they can operate, in which they can diminish the impact of potential traumas and whatnot, and they do it very quickly.
Yeah, and often as well in those circumstances, won't they? They'll find themselves engaging in behaviours that allow them to reassert control in some way, whatever they are, and those will be behaviours that would seem, bizarre or unusual to an outsider, but in the context of the child and their attempt to make sense of the world, make perfect sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even if they don't make sense in any logical way, they make sense emotionally. They act as like it's similar to the phenomena of young people like self-harming, like cutting themselves or whatnot.
Right.
It has a very similar effect, really. It expresses similar sublimated issues or concerns or whatnot. But it is fascinating. And what I find with I often have a real issue with fiction that's aimed at children. I often have a real issue with it because it is often written by adults who don't remember what it is to be a child.
Yeah.
They just don't remember. And so the child characters in children's fiction is very often they're not very well written. They don't come across with any fidelity or sincerity at all. I call it the C.S. Lewis effect. It's when children are not children. So the children characters in, for example, the Chronicles of Narnia are not children. Not by any stretch of the imagination are they real children. What they are vessels for the adult writer's own concerns and agendas and so on and so forth. So they don't operate as children do. Anyone who, I mean, I'm not a parent, but I do engage with children quite a lot, and anyone who is engaged with children at all will know that they are ambiguous, they are unexpectedly phenomenally clever and insightful. They can be incredibly perverse on a number of levels, ambiguous. They can be arbitrary in the same way that adults can be. They are complex entities. And the really good writers for children acknowledge that.
And here's an interesting point, and this kind of brings us back to some of the earlier discussion and indeed subjects we've spoken about before. But I think one of the few writers who is actually exceptionally good at writing children, one of them's Clive Barker, who we're going to be talking about.
Yes, of course.
But the other one is King. I think King is one of the few writers who gets children and captures children. And although, again, it is clearly in any number of ways not suitable for children, I mean, clearly not, epically not. Nevertheless, having read that as a child, I can confirm one of the things that is so amazing about that book is it does capture children.
Yeah,
it really does. You read that, and I remember one of the reasons it blew my mind so much reading it as a kid was feeling for the first time by kids' literature, because I'd read Narnia. I'd read all kinds of, I'd read Blyton, I'd read all kinds of, stuff aimed at kids. I read it and I was like, okay, someone actually gets kids.
Someone actually understands or remembers what it's like to actually be a child.
And in retrospect, all those other children became two-dimensional to me, and I wouldn't have been able to put my finger on it before, because it's that thing, you don't know you're colorblind till you're not anymore, right?
Of course, yeah.
You don't know you're deaf till you have the implant and you can hear. Well, it's the same thing. I was like, oh. I mean, it is. I mean, that book obviously blew the doors off in any number of ways, as you'd expect. But that is one of the ways. It's a non-trivial part of why that book's so important to me. As a, still as a writer as well as a reader, it's just that feeling of a feeling of being seen.
Yeah.
For the first time, and seeing myself or a version of me on the page, or imagining I could be part of that group, imagining that...
Yeah, I mean, it is something about the losers in it, when they are children. They all feel real. They all actually feel like kids that, even if some of them are, they sort of inhabit archetypes to some degree, they're archetypes we all know from our own experience of being children, from our own peer group that we used to hang around with or whatever, That's
right, yeah.
They are all very, very sincere as characters, and they have that necessary complexity where they question their own motivations. This is another thing that happens a lot in children's fiction, I'm telling you. The children characters, even the protagonists, tend to not have internal monologues. They don't have internal monologues at all, so they don't second guess or think about why they do what they do or why this is happening. They just do.
Which means they basically don't have any interiority at all, right?
Exactly.
Which is why they feel two-dimensional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it does tend to happen in a lot of the fiction from sort of C.S. Lewis's era that's aimed at children does do that.
Yeah, the only times you get it, thinking about it, so you get it a bit with... You get it a bit with Alice, don't you? Alice has some interiority.
Well, I would say that Alice is all interiority.
Yes.
Because
you could certainly argue that. Yeah.
If you take the stance that Wonderland is sort of a projection of her psychoscape or whatever, which is the way a lot of sort of postmodern readers have taken it.
Yeah.
Then it's entirely interior, technically.
Yep. No, that works. And I think later
on Alice is a good shout. Alice is a really good shout because she is like a child, and like a real child, in the sense that when she's wandering around Wonderland, she doesn't automatically bow to authority. She questions all the time, and quite impertinently.
Yeah.
She does things that she shouldn't do, that she knows are kind of perverse and kind of naughty, which is fairly remarkable given the era in which it was written, the era of good manners and of children doing as they were bloody told, She is a really good example of a well-written child character.
But also back to what we were talking about earlier, resilience. Like, she's in a situation that would turn most adults into a gibbering wreck outside of 5 minutes, and she's infinitely malleable. She just rolls with it.
She just goes with it.
And part of how she rolls with it is the questioning. She's trying to figure out how it's all working. How does it all fit together? What are the rules now? And she just goes with it.
Well, again, that's actually a real mark of, I find, the really good children's fantasy fiction, where they do sort of, because of course another thing about childhood that adults forget completely is the way that the internal world and the external world is often so blurred. Whereby you can even I remember really clearly as a child sort of kind of hallucinating things, where your imagination was working so feverishly because you're immersed in a game with your action figures or with your friends or
Yeah.
whatnot, where suddenly you were seeing these worlds or these creatures. They were sort of outside. You could hear their voices. You could see them projected in front of you. That happened a lot when I was a kid.
And I think the other thing I'd do is I'd often find myself playing through those, replaying those games as movies, as drifting off to sleep. You know what I mean? Like I'd find myself running through the narrative in my head and kind of turning it into a cinematic, especially if you were playing with, whatever Star Wars toys or something like that, or the A-Team, or,
Transformers.
You had, Transformers, right. You had visual markers for that, didn't you, already? And I remember that. I remember doing that, just kind of reconstructing those narratives as movies in my head as I was either trying or failing to drift off to sleep, as the case may be. But yeah.
And I find like the writers that remember this, that remember the experience of it, when the fantastical elements start to occur, the children tend to just take it. They don't like do what the adults would do and deny it, where it's like, this can't be real, this has got to be an hallucination, this is insane. It's just a new context, because of course it's to a child of a particular age, it's entirely likely that there could be this pseudo-demonic figure with a rictus grin who comes through the window and offers him a place at this fantastical world.
Yeah, well,
why not?
Well, I mean, also because we encourage it. I mean, as adults, we sell them the myth of Santa Claus.
Of course.
We sell them these fairy tales, and we want it. We take vicarious delight in their belief in this nonsense that we've driven. I mean, in the case of Santa, I think entirely harmless, wonderful nonsense. That we
I was a bad kid for that.
Yeah,
I was a bad kid for that. I knew Santa wasn't real by the age of 5.
I think the trouble is, the more imaginative you are as a kid, the less time you get to enjoy that one.
You ask questions, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. I remember because our house doesn't have a functioning chimney, and I remember like asking my mum and dad, "Well, he's supposed to come down the chimney, isn't he?" And I could see I remember the look on my dad's face. He's like, "Yeah," and I was like, "Well, ours doesn't work. We've got a fire. There's no space. There's a fire there." And I remember them thinking very quickly and coming up with some bullshit about how he's got a magic key for the houses that don't have a, And I remember saying to them things like, "Well, you buy the toys. I've been with you when you've bought the toys.
Why does Sandy get the credit?
What's the point of sending them off to the North Pole just so Santa can deliver them again?
Yeah.
What's the point of that? Because, ultimately, most kids don't really care.
No.
As long as they get the toys on Christmas, they'll make their own fantasy up. They'll make their own worlds up, not the prescribed one. I think a lot of parents may have a little bit of anxiety about the Santa Claus thing.
It's a really tough one. I mean, you do, as I say, you want to kind of enjoy it. You want to get and it is, look, I mean, the first year we took her to the store, Santa, and she told Santa what she wanted, and she whispered in his ear, and then he told us afterwards, and she got it. I mean, that was cool.
Yeah.
That was a fun, and I enjoyed that. But the point is, we feed their imaginations, and even after they figure it out, but they're still, I think with that you do plant the seed of possibility,
Yes, absolutely. It makes the world a little more malleable, doesn't it?
And look, I don't want to go too far down this alleyway necessarily, but the other one, of course, is religion, where we teach, because I mean, like, even if you believe in religion, you're accepting that there's something supernatural and post-rational about it,
absolutely. By definition, there are miracles, aren't there? So there are suspensions of reality.
Right, and if you're teaching children that as a real thing that happens, well, one of the things that's going to do is present that idea in their heads that actually the world can be other than it is.
Absolutely. I mean, you literally create the notion of a demon-haunted world.
Yeah.
Just by the simplest concept. You don't even have to go into detail about specific miracles or whatever. It's just the possibility. It means that there is magic in the world. It means that the abstract and the actual can sort of intermingle, or one can take over the other. But it's a really good shout, like conflating Rictus with Santa Claus. I never thought of that before, but he is, isn't he?
Of course he is.
He is absolutely a kind of pseudo Santa Claus. I mean, for those who haven't read the book, I mean, it's kind of a very simple story in a way, isn't it? I mean, the structure is simple, the concepts are simple. They're very ingenious.
This is a classic fairy tale, actually. Yeah. I mean, it's entirely modern in the sense that it's new, it's original as far as I can tell.
And the kids are modern as well. The kids are postmodern kids, so they have all of the postmodern sensibilities of children who were born in the postmodern era. You know, the protagonist, Harvey Swick, is a little bit of a smart-ass, isn't he?
Yes, he definitely is.
He's a little bit smart, he's a little bit precocious, and that's kind of where the story derives from, isn't it? It's the fact that he is smart and he is precocious and he needs stimulation. You know, he needs something a bit more than what the world is giving him. And that's kind of what makes him susceptible to the holiday house and to Mr. Hood and the seductions of the house, I suppose.
It is. I mean, interestingly, of course, it also ends up being the narrative pivot for the entire story.
And also the point of his salvation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I love, because that's Barker saying, it's okay to be the bright, imaginative kid.
Actually, there's more transgression in this book than I think you would get from a first-hand reading. If you read it for the first time, and it's actually quite a fun children's story. It's a fantasy story. It's got this really good mythology, wonderful imagery, some slightly scary moments, some slightly Barkerian moments.
Definitely.
But it just comes off as a really quite fun fantasy story. And then you read it again.
Yeah.
And suddenly it kind of becomes the equivalent of Sacrament for kids. There's a lot of, as there is in all of the best children's fiction, there's a hell of a lot of subversion here.
Yeah.
It's a bit like Roald Dahl in that regard. You know how in Roald Dahl books... Roald Dahl books are great. I fucking love Roald Dahl because of what he says to children, which is, you know what, the adults are often wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
The adults are often wrong, they're often stupid, they're often mindlessly cruel.
Yeah, sometimes they might even be evil.
Yeah, sometimes they might even be just complete bastards. So... You know what? What I love in Roald Dahl is the children are encouraged to be themselves. Yeah. They're encouraged to have some sense of their inner self. And that's what this book does beautifully. But even more intensely than Dahl, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that ultimately it's his imagination that saves him, right? It's his ability to conceive. I mean, the final confrontation with Hood.
Oh, it's great. I mean, what I love about it is the fact that he uses his imagination. Hood is the kind of character that thinks he knows what children want, because he's been giving them what he thinks they want for years. He's been beguiling them with these illusions of what they're conditioned to want, what they're conditioned to imagine, which is of course Christmas and materials. It's material goods, isn't it? Ultimately, it's the prescribed stuff of imagination. But Harvey ultimately defeats Hood by saying, "No, I don't want that. Give me this. Give me all of the insanity, the strangeness, the absurdity that my imagination can vomit up." I love that. And I love the fact that Hood's mechanism can't cope with it.
Yeah, it can't cope with a genuinely untamed imagination demanding the impossible.
Right. It's brilliant. I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very clever, it's very subtle, and it's that thing again. Barker's very good at writing endings to his mythologies.
Yeah.
He is really damn good at it. I mean, I know King comes in for a bit of shtick for this because he often... And it's not always as warranted as people think, but it is often the case, isn't it? When he set up his mythologies, he has a bit of difficulty tying them up well.
I think with King it's happened often enough that it's become a trope, and I think it's often hung around books that don't deserve it. Yeah. But I think that you can find 2 or 3 key offenders where it's unarguably the case that the endings, the books just kind of stop. They just run out of narrative, and then something stupid happens, and we can all think of 2 or 3 where that's happened.
The Overlook Hotel blowing up.
I think it gets. No! I think it gets too widely applied. I think actually he's actually fine most of the time, and occasionally I think he's actually quite good. But
most of the time it's okay. But there are.
I mean, I think we've discussed before, like, even though we've not done it as an episode, but I think The Stand is always my ground zero for that, which is a novel I adore in almost all respects. But I just flat out hate the ending. It's just bad. It's just bad.
You know what was even worse? Do you remember the 1990s series when that came out? At the big silly hand that comes down, the golden hand of God. What the fuck else are you supposed
to do? It's stupid. You might just do it. Give up.
I mean, for those of you in the US, you probably won't get this, but the National Lottery at that time were running this ad campaign.
That's right.
Where this big golden hand would come down in the advert and point to the winner, and some godly voice would say, "It's you."
It's you.
And you know, when I watched as a kid, when I watched The Stand,
Yeah.
and I watched that ending, my mum and my brother fell about laughing.
Yeah.
All three of us fell about laughing because all we could think of was "it's
It's
you."
you. Yeah, it's pretty bad, man.
It's
Pretty
pretty
bad.
damn awful. But the ending to this mythology is
It's magic.
near as damn it perfect.
I think it is perfect. I really do, because
Yeah.
it's even got the. I mean the beautiful coda where he goes back to the hill.
Yeah.
Because the magic's been destroyed, he can go. He can finally find the house again,
Yeah.
the site where the house was. It's just, it's gorgeous.
The
It's absolutely
resolutions
wonderful.
for all of the characters, particularly the children who are caught within the house,
Yeah.
is beautiful, isn't it? And the fact that
Yeah.
because there is this sort of time dilation thing going on, where some of the children have been there for a long time. So
Yeah.
Hood has been basically feeding off of them for a very long time. So the characters, when he encounters them again, he's still a child because he hasn't been there for very long. But some of them are old. Some of them are. I love that Lulu. Obviously, is an elderly woman.
That's right, yeah.
It's brilliant and beautiful, and I love that. I absolutely sorry, I mean we are leaping all over the place here.
Yeah.
But in the mythology of the Thief of Always, there is a house. There's Mr. Hood's holiday house, and children. Mr. Hood sends out agents like this creature Rictus, who go to children's homes and they say to children that they have a place at this wonderful holiday house which is magical, and it's sort of like a summer camp almost, isn't it? It's got that
Yeah.
feeling about it.
Yeah.
And they lie through their teeth. They say like they say to Harvey Swick, who is the protagonist of this book, "Oh, it's all sorted. Your parents know. They've signed off on it, and it's fine. You can call them every night and whatnot." Of course, a complete and utter deception. And they lure children to the holiday house. And the holiday house is brilliant. I mean, it's amazing. It's beautiful.
is.
It's this big, wonderful house that is everything a child could want in a potential playground. And more than that besides, it is a place of mysteries and of magic where every day is a year, and that year is subdivided into holidays that children will recognise. So at particular times of the day it will be Easter, at particular times of the day it will be Halloween, at particular times it'll be Christmas, and it's wonderful and enchanting and beautiful. But of course there is a darkness to it. There is something going on, and as it transpires, what's happening is Mr. Hood, the person who created the holiday house and is actually sort of symbiotically part of it. When you encounter Mr. Hood at the end of the book, he's horrific, isn't he?
It's brilliant.
He's like
Absolutely brilliant.
the house kind of becomes him. He's this massive gaping maw of splintered floorboards and nails and what. He's absolutely horrific. He's absorbing the years. He's absorbing the time that he's stealing from the children. As the days are going on, years are passing outside, and he's absorbing that potential from the children to fuel his own longevity, his own existence. And there's a whole raft of stuff there. Oh my God!
I mean, the other interesting thing about that, of course, is as the children are being distracted by this endless play and this illusion of I mean, the banquets and the presents and all that kind of thing. As you say, for each day that's passing, a year is passing in the real world. But the other thing that is happening is the children themselves are fading.
Yeah,
And they're not in the physical sense, but kind of in a mental sense. The more they become acclimatized to the house, the less their personality just starts to kind of leach away a little bit.
Yeah.
And eventually, as Harvey discovers, they end up kind of transmuting, don't they? They end up
they almost devolve, don't they?
Yeah, that's right.
He finds a pool. There's a forbidden pond.
So great.
In
Well,
the
that's the
holiday
interesting thing, isn't it?
house.
It's not outright forbidden. It's just
No.
like, why would you want to go there? It's miserable. It's the
Yeah.
one bit of the house that's dirty and dark
Yeah.
and kind of smelly, and it's hard to get to. You got to get through these bushes. There's all
Yeah.
these thorns. Just come up to the tree house. Help me build another, wing on the tree house.
But this is another wonderful thing. Harvey is a precocious and slightly naughty child, and if he's told
Yeah.
that somewhere is even if it's suggested that it's forbidden,
That's
or
right.
if he senses that the adults don't want want him to go there, his immediate inclination is to go there and have a look what all the trouble is. And of course what he finds is that this hideous sort of mire-like pond is where the former residents of the holiday house are, and they've become these incredibly sorrowful fish-like creatures that live in the filth. They live in the mire of this pond, and they vaguely remember who they used to be, but not only in the most futile sense.
And I think Barker does such a good job with those passages because they're not at no point does it would. I think it would have been very, very easy to over-egg that.
Yeah.
It would have been very easy to have that pond feel as something utterly monstrous and utterly alien and terrifying. It doesn't.
It's not. It's more sad.
He walks a really fine line with it where it feels just slightly wrong, slightly off. But it's not like some, it's not some screaming, gibbering horror. It's just, it's cold and it's dark and it's unpleasant and it's sort of grubby and he does such a masterful job with the atmosphere in those pages where Harvey kind of fights his way through the bushes and makes it to the, and of course he tries to sail one of his early presents because he's kind of, even then he's testing the house. One of the presents he imagines, because that's the way it works, you imagine the present you want and then you get it under the tree, and he imagines a present he know the house can't provide because it's a toy he had and he lost as a very young child that he was still upset, and of course the house provides, it gives that thing. And it's an ark, isn't it, with all these lead figures for the animals. And he ends up taking it to the pond to try and float it, which doesn't end well.
Doesn't quite work out, does it?
But it's a wonderful sequence.
It is, and there is something, I mean, just Barker's so aware of metaphor whenever he writes. It's like, it's throughout his adult fiction, and it's throughout this as well. And that is somewhat symbolic. That whole notion, it is about putting away or abandoning the things that you define by, the material things that you define by, which you do as a child, You must remember, like, the Christmas presents you had. That dominated your every waking thought and moment for a few months after, at least. I remember that so well. And you learn through, as a matter of experience, I think, you learn to put them away. You learn to put them down, like they get broken or something to that effect. Maybe they get thrown away or something like that. And you just learn to detach. You learn to become more as a result of that experience. And that's what this is.
Yeah, but I think there's even more than that going on. One of the things I find so fascinating about the house is the house on its surface presents what I think most of us might on the surface consider to be like the ideal of childhood. Because the thing is, like, I'm quite, in real life, I'm kind of ideologically opposed to school. I'm passionate about education, but I think school is an absolutely awful way of attempting to, to complete the necessary task of education for children. And I understand a lot about how it evolved to where it is today. And by the way, there are thousands of people who are working incredibly hard under almost impossible conditions to do the best by the kids they teach. And I don't want to give an impression that I don't, understand and respect that effort.
No,
I absolutely
there's
do.
a difference between the concept of school and education and teachers who are working within those systems. Definitely.
My issues are systemic and ideological. They are actually absolutely not meant to be a reflection on the individuals who are doing their best in, I personally believe, impossible circumstances.
Oh, believe me, I used to be a teacher, and most teachers would agree with you.
Right, okay,
most teachers have these conversations on an hourly basis, so
sure.
you'll be fine.
So, but I just want to make it clear to anyone who might be listening who might not be involved in the sector just where I stand on that, because I think it's an important distinction to make. But the interesting thing about the holiday house for me is on the surface of it, it is absolutely idyllic because there is no school, there is no prescribed times. You eat when you're hungry, you play the rest of the time, you play whatever you want. But what's fascinating about that and about the way Barker kind of very carefully and gently starts undermining that is there's just this sense that it's not quite right somehow. And what we discover is the reason it's not quite right is if you have a mind like Harvey's and you keep asking questions, you start to get into problems.
That's right.
You
if
start
you have
to run into difficulties.
A genuine child's mind that's inquiring and curious and perverse and isn't going to be trammeled. It isn't going to be contained by these prescriptions of what some old man thinks children want.
Right. And that's the really smart part, because although it looks idyllic on the surface, it actually is not addressing key needs and concerns of children.
No, not
Because
at all.
because what it's saying, and again, you want to talk about a subversive message, but
Yeah.
part of what I think the book is really saying is like, kids require danger as part of development.
Yeah,
I think is
it is
actually
saying that.
one of the things the book is saying, and that is an incendiary thing to say at any time
Yeah.
in a
so.
piece of children's fiction.
It's also saying, I mean, I think it's even more incendiary than that in many respects, because it is actually saying to children, beware of adults and of the adult world. Be aware of what it prescribes you should want and what you should like, because it will use that to abuse you. It will use that to literally suck the life from you, you know? You have to look at Mr. Hood and what he represents as an adult, because he is the most prominent adult figure in the story, and what he represents is, I mean, it's almost political in a way. It's a corrupt older generation sucking the life and the futures from a younger generation.
Well, I mean, Harvey literally describes him as a vampire, and
Yeah.
from that point on in the novel, he's named as a vampire, and I think
That's
that's
true.
a completely apt description of who he is. And I mean, obviously the vampire as a trope is not unproblematic. It has its births in some really, its origins in some really disgusting kind of anti-Semitic.
Oh yeah, massive racism and whatnot.
It's got some really, and concerns about immigration, really kind
Yeah.
of quite horrible reactionary stuff. But
It's that whole Bram Stoker thing of the lascivious foreigner coming
Yeah, of
through the
course it
windows
is.
of our women and making
Right.
our women like him and spiriting them away. Yeah.
But like any really exceptionally strong, metaphorical figure, it can have a resonance and a depth and a set of meanings that go beyond the source, beyond the original
totally.
trope, beyond the original problematic roots. And I think the vampire, in the modern era in 2019, the notion of the vampire as a stand-in for to pick an example at random, the system of capitalism, say, which is, where people's surplus labour is relentlessly kind of sucked up the chain up to the very top of the pile, where a very small number of people are, to extend the metaphor slightly too far, getting very fat indeed. But you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
That kind of does work. And the idea, although the interesting thing with Hood is Hood's not exploiting labour. It's slightly more complicated than that. What Hood is doing is providing endless distraction, and then, as you say,
It's the jangling keys, isn't it?
Right.
That's what it is. It's bread and circuses.
exactly what he's extracting is potential.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
Hood is very much like, I just thought of this, but Hood reminds me very much of the depiction of entertainments from Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah.
Which in turn feel very much like a description of, for me anyway, certainly the kind of fever that was around reality TV at its height, where people, because the thing for me was I never followed any of that stuff. I caught the first half of the first season of Big Brother and I was like, okay, I got it, and it's not for me.
Nope.
But it would get to the point in certain areas of my life when I'd be hanging out with certain groups of people, it would feel like I was an alien, because the conversations would all revolve around these particular pieces of mass entertainment, and I'd be hearing names, characters, references to situations. I wouldn't understand any of it, and I'd feel
This
like
is a problem, isn't it? It becomes assumed within culture. It's something that happens generally. I mean, it happens with soap operas. It happens with football season when that rolls around. Because it's so culturally assumed that you will be consuming this material.
Right.
People will just start conversations with you. They won't provide any context for what they're talking about. They will just throw a name at you and start and ask about this situation, and I often find myself baffled by it. Reality TV is exactly the same. It's a real worry for me, that is. The fact that people can just start engaging with you about stuff that is culturally assumed. And most people will know what they're talking about. The vast majority of people will know, because they are so culturally prevalent. And people are getting their entertainment and their media from very concentrated sources, by and large. But it destroys the art of conversation. It really does.
But I feel like that's what, for me. I mean, I'm still trying to figure this out, which is a really good sign. But I think for me, that's what the Hood. That's at least part of, maybe key to what the Hood House represents. It's actually because it's not it's not activity, it's distraction.
It's distraction, yeah. And it's,
You know,
again, it's this notion of prescribing to children what they should be interested in, or what adults assume that they should be interested in. And which to a certain degree they are, and they can be,
Sure.
but it doesn't last. That's the thing. That's the
No.
thing with the Hood house, the holiday house. It has no real substance. And I think this may be something that this may be an observation that Harvey makes about Hood himself. He is just empty, ultimately.
yeah.
There's
Well,
nothing
that's-
to him.
Right. I mean, he's literally there's literally a void where when he's finally forced to attain a physical form, there's literally a void where his heart is. And in fact, the way Harvey defeats him in part is by, revealing that he strips away the last item of clothing that Hood's kind of got that covers this void where his heart should be, and that's in an attempt to reclaim that clothing. That's where Hood finally fatally slips, which is, I mean, that is just. It's an amazing sequence, that, because it's a breathtaking action. It's a horror action sequence. It really is
for children. Yeah,
Yeah.
it works really well because there is genuine threat from Hood. Within the holiday house, he's kind of God.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah. So I mean, I guess it's a good point to mention it. So having read it by myself and decided it was suitable, I read it out loud to Scarlett over the course of about 30 nights, because we read it a chapter a night. So.
What did you make of it? I mean, that was something that really interested me when you told me you were reading it. How did she find it?
Well, so she enjoyed it. She definitely, the threat level was right on the edge of her comfort zone, which is perfect. That's where you want it to be. I think the single toughest sequence was the death of Clue Cat, is it?
Ah, yes.
Now that she struggled with, and she did kind of say at the end, "Is that the scariest bit?" And I said, "Well." I said it doesn't get much worse than that, which I think was true.
It's a difficult thing though, that isn't it? Because
tough.
you can't actually preempt what children are going to be afraid of.
No, I mean, I think, funnily enough, I did have a sense that was going to be the sticking point on the way through, because I've kind of, I know enough about her at this point. I mean, this is a bit of a digression, but we watched Doctor Who when she was a lot younger.
Yeah.
Now she can just watch any of it, but at the time I was hand-picking episodes, because that show can get dark, especially the imagery and what have you. But what I'd learned with her quite early on with Who was that she was actually fine with the aliens, and the aliens could get as crazy and as violent as they wanted, and that was basically didn't bother. But it was human-on-human violence that would freak her out.
Okay.
So, we were watching Gridlock. I thought Gridlock's great. Cat nuns, the face of Bo, it's going to rock. But then there's a moment where someone points a gun at Martha. And she freaked out.
That did it, yeah?
Yeah, she completely freaked, and I had to turn it off. And she still won't rewatch The Lodger, full stop.
Right.
Because the voice from the house, the voice from the top of the stairs, the room, and the people go in and just disappear.
I'm with her on that, but it's not. It's not the voice from the stairs. It's James Corden.
James Corden, yeah.
It's James Corden for me.
Look, we've all got our reasons, but it's interesting to me that's the thing that sticks with her. So I knew that she'd kind of probably get through the Halloween, the hangman sequence, and the vampire sequence,
because the Halloween sequence is awesome, isn't it? I mean,
it's fucking fantastic.
At that point, Barker is still doing that. He's playing that very clever trick where he's inducing the reader to be as in love with the holiday house as the children are.
Oh yeah, it's a joint seduction. The house is seducing Harvey, and it's also seducing the reader. It's really
absolutely
smart.
And the Halloween sequence, I think, is brilliant. Where there are what the house does is it provides an array of costumes for the children, but they're not just costumes. When you put them on, you kind of become the monster that you're portraying. And it's very ambiguous, isn't it, that sequence? It's wonderfully ambiguous, because Harvey puts on this wonderful sort of gargoyle vampire costume with wings and claws and talons. And he thinks it's going to be a great wheeze. He thinks it's going to be great fun, because I do believe the kid he's trying to scare, Wendell, was a bit of a dick to him. A little earlier.
Wendell totally got him. I mean, that's the setup. Wendell gets him with a hangman, a moment where he feels like he's witnessed a hanging, and it turns out to have been a dummy. And it's that, by the way, that sequence is brilliant, because I was reading that with Scarlett, and her eyes were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And when it gets to the punchline, and it's like she audibly sighed with relief.
Yeah.
And Barker pitched that perfectly, because if it had run on even another paragraph or two, I might have lost her.
It might have been a bit too much. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit too much.
It's really fucking scary.
It is. I mean, but the sequence after with Harvey as this sort of vampire ghoul thing, when he basically swoops down from the the parapets of the house onto Wendell and scares the hell out of him. But there is this wonderful ambiguity where Harvey almost loses himself in the role.
It's actually a pivotal moment in the entire book, I think, in the narrative, because it's so you've had the scene, you've had the previous scene where Wendell's pulled the prank on Harvey, and Harvey's like, I'm going to get you back for that, and he's really angry about it. But this is the reason the costume is so scary is because he actually gets. So he was brought there by Rictus, but the intervention comes from Ma. That's where we first meet Ma.
Yeah.
And Ma actually changes his face. It's not just the costume. She touches his face because he says, I want to be a vampire.
Yeah.
And she physically alters his features so that he'll look more vampiric.
Yeah.
But there's certainly a suggestion that it's not, the magic is slightly more than skin deep.
Yeah.
He has the opportunity. It's almost like he has the opportunity to become a vampire. And when he lands and Wendell's there, and it's wonderful because Barker plays it out where Wendell says, "There's another kid around here. Take him instead of me." There's a classic kind of like, and Harvey's anger in that moment. And then he feels this kind of singing in his blood, like he could become a vampire. He could actually
hurt this kid. It's not just about frightening him anymore.
That's right. And afterwards, because he decides against it, but afterwards, Ma and Jive are like, "You really blew it, there, kid. You could have been something special."
You get the impression that maybe that's what they were. That's what happened to them. That's how they became the operators of the house and the agents of Mr. Hood. That maybe they were children as well, but gave in to the magic. They actually gave in and maybe did something awful.
And it also implies that it's that thing of like what Hood's really, because the thing is that Wendell's a really interesting character because Wendell's just not terribly imaginative.
He's not terribly likable either.
No, he's not actually. He's not a bad kid, but he's not a good kid either. He's
a little... Yeah, he is. He is just a child. He is like a classic slightly unlikable child who can be a bit mean, who can be a bit petulant, who can be a bit cowardly at times.
And self-centered. Fundamentally completely self-centered, which is not on you. Most children are.
Absolutely.
But there's a lovely... Because there's a sequence where they go out and they come... they escape, but then they have to go back. And Wendell, almost as soon as Wendell gets back to the house, he just slips back into that mode of being. Yeah. And Harvey realizes he's going to have to do it alone. He's going to have to fight the house alone, basically.
Yeah, because Wendell is going to be no help, is he?
No, that's right.
He's not that kid. He's not that kid. I mean, Harvey isn't entirely likable either.
No, he's not. Harvey's got his own issues. But what's interesting to me about the difference between Wendell and Harvey is that there certainly feels to me to be... It's almost like Wendell's like the classic fodder for the house.
Yeah.
But there's always a feeling from quite early on that the house knows Harvey is different and they want him.
Yeah.
They want that imagination, that same instinct that leads him to go to the lake. And to
what a
witness
meal
that.
he'd be. I imagine a soul like Harvey's or a potential like Harvey's could sustain the house for a long time.
Yeah, or as you say, maybe what it is they want him to become an agent of the house himself.
Yeah, that's
they
entirely
want to harness that. And it does feel like that's, because once he confronts Hood, the language Hood keeps using is that of an apprentice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seductive, isn't it?
Oh, it's wonderful. And the other thing is the way he describes him as a fellow thief. That's such a great moment.
Isn't that interesting? Because again, you've got... Again, this is something that marries this book to Sacrament. Or it sort of echoes the themes of Sacrament. Because Harvey, through the process of this book, goes on an almost shamanistic journey. Does he not? It is in that regard. It is a kind of growing up story. It's a child becoming more than a child or evolving along a particular line, and it's the same basic trajectory that Will Rabjohns from Sacrament has.
Right.
Through his traumas and what. It's really quite interesting. I do firmly find that this book echoes Sacrament in some very sincere ways, despite the fact that Sacrament is obviously a much more adult book.
Yeah.
I love that. I love the notion of the fact that Harvey emerges from this different.
Oh, yeah.
He's not the same anymore. He is not the same child. And there is a kind of feeling that he could go off into the world and not become like Hood in the sense of his negativity, but he could become another magician, another illusionist,
You certainly feel like he could walk, as an adult, he could walk into another quite different Clive Barker narrative as a principal character.
Absolutely. Wouldn't you love to see a sequel to this that's adult oriented? That's
well, Harvey the grown-up.
That's
yeah,
Harvey
absolutely.
the grown-up who kind of remembers and goes looking for the magic again or something.
Yeah, that would work.
Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great? I would love to see that. I would love to see that. I mean, in effect, you kind of have it in, as I say, Will Rabjohns from Sacrament is kind of like that.
Right.
There is definite overlap between these characters in the same way there's kind of overlap between a lot of Barker's protagonists. A lot of them go on this journey.
Right.
Where, I mean, it's something I love about The Thief of Always in particular because it's a children's book. And there is this, again, it defeats type. It defeats type in the sense that even a lot of the more deviant children's books, what happens at the end is everything's resolved and the kids go back to the way they used to live.
Yeah.
Not much has changed. In fact, what tends to happen is that the resolution of the status quo is what's desired. Yeah?
Yeah, that's
right.
What's
desired. In this book, that's not what happens.
No, that's interesting, isn't it? It kind of, I mean, because it plays with the idea that that's what it's going to do.
Yeah.
And it sort of does.
It sort of does, but then it does that wonderful thing of pulling the rug out from under you, where it's that you can never go home again narrative.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the midway point on that is fascinating.
Oh, Jesus God! I remember reading it for the first time, and I was like, "What? What's it?" Because in any other children's book, that would be the end, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That point would be the end. He'd open the door, and his mum and dad would be there, and it would be all fine. It'd be okay. But it's not. He escapes from the Hood house, and it's not okay.
It was so funny because Scarlett, at first she was like, "He's got the wrong house. He's got the wrong house," and then she was like, "Oh my God!"
Did she click as to?
Yeah, she got it. Well, she's she's had the Doctor Who grounding. She knows a bit about time travel, but she flipped her lid, and then she was like, "That's why each day is a year because it's actually a year." Like it all. I mean, that was wonderful seeing like it just click into place for her.
Isn't it really clever? I was thinking about this earlier. The book is called The Thief of Always.
Yep.
It tells you what's happening in the title, and I don't know about you, but you know what? It took me a while after my first reading to realise that it's there. The title tells you what's going on.
But the interesting thing is that the way that Hood translates Thief of Always is killer, right? Is murderer. That's what it means to Hood ultimately. Because when they talk about, because when when Hood confronts him and says, you're a thief too. By that point, Harvey's killed Ma.
Yeah. Right.
And Jive, I think, by that point.
I think at that point, he has, and that's again, it's how he's changing. This kid is becoming powerful. This kid is gaining agency, and sometimes, I mean, the book never resolves this. It never resolves the fact that agency is sometimes a dark agency. He's learnt how to kill.
Yeah. And I mean, in this case, monsters, but still. And it's interesting how he. I mean, in each case, what's clever about it is how he defeats each monster by turning their power against them.
Yeah,
which is
he uses his imagination, because that's what the house is made of.
Yeah, but also specifically, so with Ma's power is that ability to transform people.
Yeah.
And it transforms people into what they imagine they want to be, which is really interesting, because, Harvey imagines the vampire, and that's what he becomes. But the way he turns that power back on Ma, it says, no, you're going to transform into what you imagine you want to be. And of course what Ma most desires is nothingness. So Ma just melts. And then with Jive, it's about turning the illusion of the house against him. So Jive's trying to seduce him with food, saying, look, here's all this wonderful, and and Harvey says, I know it's dust. I know it's dust. I know it's dust and ash. I don't want any part of it. And Jive says, no, it isn't. Look, and eats it. And then, of course, it is. And he turns to ash and dust.
It's all about belief, isn't it? It's all about what you perceive in your own imagination. It is about that, but it's also about recognizing that the strength of any monster is also its weakness, and that is fascinating. Yeah, and that's really like mythologically powerful, and he does the same thing, and that's the best bit for me of the whole sequence is Kana, where Kana is this monster, this dragon, this Gorgon, this creature of teeth and eyes and claws and talons, and the way Harvey defeats Gorgon is by offering it friendship.
by stroking it instead of showing it fear.
Yeah, because that's what it wants ultimately, isn't
That's
it?
what it.
That's
And
what
then when it
wants.
receives that, it just disintegrates.
Yeah.
It's absolutely amazing that.
Yeah, it's a brilliant parable about sort of taking control of your own imagination and your own emotions and your own fears ultimately.
Yeah.
Because it is a dreaming space, the holiday house, and it is made up of the stolen dreams. It's not like Mr. Hood's dreams or anything like that. It's made
No.
up of stolen dreams and potential. So yeah, it is Harvey turning that magic against those who would use it to abuse children. You know, it's really quite clever. It's really quite beautiful in that regard. It's an important lesson.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's that kind of. I mean, it's the logic of. It's the logic of judo, isn't it? Jiu-jitsu. You use the momentum of your attacker against them. You know, you allow them to put all the effort in, and then you just flip the script on them, sort of thing.
There's an element of like holding on to the self as well. I mean, all of these characters, the way they work is they want Harvey to feel particular emotions. Yeah, that's where that's how they gain authority over the children who are inside the holiday house, and he just refuses.
Yeah.
He just says no. I'm not going to feel and imagine what you want me to. I'm going to feel and imagine what I want to.
Yeah, and there's a thing about there is a thing about imagination as well. I mean, the final confrontation with Hood is wonderful because Harvey, Hood's basic thing is I'll give you anything, but then you have to be my apprentice.
That's it, yeah.
And Harvey's like, anything? And you can see, like, he figures out, like, this is how I get it done. And he starts, and it's pure imagination, he's just throwing off all these impossible things that he wants. And Hood's, the harder Hood tries, the more kind of decrepit the house looks. You can see it's taking a toll, a physical toll on the house.
But what I love about it is that it draws a distinction between legitimate childhood imagination and the adult prescriptions and assumptions of what childhood imagination is. So Hood gives them material things, he gives them what is prescribed by adult culture essentially, but which ultimately is hollow. It is just ashes and dust. Yeah. Harvey, in that confrontation, he imagines the weirdest, most absurd, the most surreal, ambiguous things imaginable, because that's what genuine imagination is like.
Yeah.
That's what the actual experience of it is like for a child and for an adult, for that matter. If they allow their imagination free reign, that's what it's like.
And I love how his final, the final thing that effectively breaks the back of Hood is to ask for all the seasons at once. Yeah. It's so great.
That's really clever, isn't it? And he tries, doesn't he? I love the fact that it almost happens. Hood almost gets it. He almost manages to manifest this paradox, but he just can't.
But it breaks him, yeah. And, I mean, Barker just goes to town on that sequence. It's such a wonderful piece of writing.
One of the things I've always adored about Barker's writing is you can tell when he's getting into the throes of it and when he's really bloody enjoying what he's writing. Yeah. And that sequence, he's going nuts, isn't he? He's just, you can imagine how frantically he's scribbling when he originally imagined that, because it is the climax, it is the point at which it's the denouement, it is the point at which the holiday house is going to collapse around Harvey. You're going to get that grand moment where the evil disintegrates upon itself, and it is epic. It's brilliant,
And it's also the entire narrative is hanging by a thread in that moment, because you're right, if Hood succeeds, Harvey's done. This is the last roll of the dice for Harvey. As much as Hood's getting exhausted, so's Harvey. He's running out of ideas. You get that.
Yeah, and he's only a kid, I mean, that's what I love about this. When I remember reading it for the first time, when he went back to the house, I was like, well, what is he gonna do exactly? What weapons does he have here? What agency or power does this kid have? And of course, what he realizes is in that place, all agency and power, because Hood's power is stolen.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not his. He's a parasite. He's ultimately a giant tick upon the world. Yeah. Everything he can do is stolen. So the minute Harvey realizes that, the jig's up.
Well, and also but explicitly so steal it back, which is the message. I mean, and that's there's a thing where Harvey has that conversation with his parents, and they you said something about stealing. What was it? He said, well, does it count as stealing if you're taking back something that was yours to start with? And his parents are like, no, that's okay.
I also love the fact that, his parents are actually like the sort of positive reflection of adulthood in this story, but they're also profoundly absent, and they don't really understand what he's experiencing at all.
No, although I do like the fact that when he goes back and they're elderly, I do like the fact that they accept his version of events.
Yeah,
I do actually. I think that's enormously to the credit of the story that the dad's like, right, well, we've got to go and find this house then.
Yeah,
let's go and find it.
It's kind of sweet, isn't it? I mean,
it's very sweet.
There is still this miscommunication between them. I still get the impression that he doesn't necessarily think that Harvey's version of events is maybe real. I think maybe he's thinking that this is the way the child has fantasized the reality, which is that they've been held in this house by this awful person for God knows how long. But I like the fact that, they do listen, probably for the first time ever in his life, because there is, at the beginning of the story, you don't really see much of them.
No.
They are kind of absent, really. And the fact that Harvey they're not abusive or anything, or overtly neglectful or anything like that. It's just that there is this essential distance between them and him.
I mean, tellingly, we only get Harvey's perspective on them.
Yeah,
I think.
That's
I don't recall them
absolutely
actually
true.
appearing in the narrative until
No.
the midway point as characters outside of Harvey remembering his mum telling him to tidy his room kind of thing, which is very that's a very mundane kind of like, you can't really read too much into that.
No,
like,
not at all.
There isn't a mother alive that hasn't had to do that at some point.
Of course. No. There's no implication that there's profound problems there. Rather, it's just the natural problems that exist between children and parents.
Right. Well, that's the gulf, isn't it, between childhood and adulthood that
which
we were
is
talking about
it is
at the
a
start.
gulf. It is a gulf.
Yeah, it is.
It's an abyss often. And very difficult. This is a thing that crops up in Barker again and again, because I know enough from my own sort of biographical readings of Barker that he does have issues with his own parents.
Right.
And that's something that comes up again and again and again and again in Barker's stories. There are often problematic relationships between parents and children.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of fairy tales as well, I think that it's funny. I was at FantasyCon last weekend, and one of the panels I was on was about parents and children in fiction and depictions of that. And it is the case, like in an awful lot of narratives from especially from fantasy, but also horror and certainly fairy tales as well. From a mechanical writing point of view, like orphans are terribly useful.
Oh my God, and they are everywhere.
Because families are just a pain in the arse.
Yeah.
They're just in narrative terms, they're a pain in the arse, because as soon as you've got families, you've got family ties. As soon as you've got ties, you've got responsibilities, and you've got reasons not to go off on the big adventure.
Yeah. You've got tensions as well, obviously. Automatic tensions that you need to address.
Yeah. But I think fundamentally what you've got is obligation, and obligation gets in the way of a good story. So make them orphans, so make them abandoned, so make them,
And suddenly that's all gone, isn't it? You've got a kind of blank slate. You can do what you like, yeah.
And the interesting thing about this, what I love, is Barker finds a completely different way to sidestep that.
Yeah.
So he has because one of the things that happens early on, and it was great because I watched Scarlett just swallow it, hook, line and sinker, which was lovely, is, the phone calls. He phones his parents from the house, and they're like, yeah, no, everything's fine. They've spoken to us. Enjoy yourself.
Of course.
Just all right, come back when you're ready.
Of course, just to lend credence to the lie.
Yeah. And it's really clever. So Scarlett's like, oh, okay. So that's,
Well, it is really clever, because what it recalls is it's engaged with the phenomena of childhood. It's like when you used to stay over at a friend's house and you had to call your mum or your dad to make sure you were okay and everything every day, or if you stayed at your grandparents and you'd always call them up. It's keyed into childhood experience. It's really clever.
Because it's a major red flag for the narrative otherwise as well. That's the thing, isn't it?
Yes.
If Harvey doesn't think about his parents anymore once he gets there, then that is, even if that's happening for legitimate narrative reasons, i.e. the magic of the house makes you forget you have parents, it's still to the reader such a gigantic red flag early on that this whole thing is completely, malevolent.
Yeah.
And at that point, Barker's still playing out the ambiguity. Because the other thing it reminds me of, because we're rereading it again at the moment, is the Blyton's Faraway Tree.
Right, right.
which has certain sort of structural similarities in that it's this magical place you go to. It's full of wonderful, interesting people. The tree itself, there's different things on different branches. You get to the top, there's a different land at the top every time you get there.
Right, that's very cool.
And it's portal to fairy. It's the same kind of thing. But obviously that's portrayed anyway as not malevolent. The faraway tree's meant to be a place of... But it's the idea that Barker's taking that central idea of, like, the magical childhood place.
Yeah.
And then he just gently seeds in these doubts about, like...
What he's doing is what he does a lot, actually. He's taking stories like, for example, Neverland. He's taking Peter Pan, and he's teasing out the rather more unpleasant implications or the subtexts of those stories and making them a bit more overt. Because there is... I mean, have you read Peter Pan?
You know what? I haven't read it. I've seen God knows how many adaptations, but I've never gone back to the source material.
There's really dark stuff in that.
Okay.
Like, for example, when a lost boy dies, and they do die because they fight the pirates and they fight the Indians on the island, the sort of Native American stereotypes. Yeah. Peter Pan forgets about them. There's no trauma in Neverland. So, and all the other lost boys forget about them too. They just disappear.
Yeah,
They're gone.
Creepy.
It is creepy, isn't it? There's something really... There is this subtext, this reading of Peter Pan. In the same way there's a reading of the Wizard of Oz books or a reading of Alice in Wonderland. That's really bloody dark. And it's there. It's not something that, that one is applying retrospectively or contriving because one wants to see it. It is absolutely there. And it's something that Barker seems to notice, and Gaiman does it all the bloody time too. If you read any of like Neil Gaiman's short stories, he takes classic fairy tales and just teases out those sublimated elements, the subtexts that are absolutely there, but which are just not addressed or which are glossed over or whatever. He just teases out the darkness, the ambiguity. And it's actually very clever to do that within the remit of a children's book, because that is a fine line to walk.
It is. I mean, the other thing that I thought about this time through was how... Because Rictus was... a really important character to me as a teenager. I don't know why exactly, but something about Richter's really jumped out at me. And I think part of it, at least, is that Richter's role in the narrative is very interesting because he's not just the prime seducer, but he's absolutely critical at the end. Yeah. And he actually... I think the way his character plays out it is one of those moments that kind of breaks the rules of what's supposed to happen. Because, the normal version of events is, you defeat the henchman, then you defeat the boss, right? And the story does play out that way, except for Rictus. Doesn't get dealt with. And I remember Scarlett reading it with Scarlett, and she's like, what's happened to Rictus? How is he? Is he going to escape? Is he going to survive? What is he? How is he? And then, of course, there's a moment there where Rictus has stolen Summer Hood's power, because Rictus is like, I always knew he was going to, eventually, fish got to swim, bird got to fly, vampire got to stab you in the back. And it obviously it twists back and Rictus ends up... But there's a moment there where Rictus says, hey, come with me, kid. We'll start a new house, you and me. And it's a great fucking moment. It's really exciting.
It is, because you could almost see it happening.
Yeah.
I could almost see Harvey becoming the next Mr. Hood or something very like him. I really could. And I like that.
No, I really like it, but what I like about it is the idea that Rictus, as one of the avatars, one of the henchmen, one of these creations, has ideas beyond his station, has an imagination. Because again, we talked earlier about how maybe what Hood was trying to do was, like, Harvey was going to become the fifth member of that gang, right? Which I think is entirely possible as a read. I love the idea that, that it implies a kind of interiority and intelligence to Rictus that goes beyond...
Oh, absolutely, yeah. He's he's not just a functionary of the house. He's an entity in and of himself. So
exactly.
It makes you wonder, because it does imply a wider mythology here, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely does.
How many of these characters have maybe gotten away?
Yeah.
Found a way of
Right.
circumventing their slavery to the house,
Right.
stolen a little bit of the immortality and gone off to create their own little realms or whatever. Is
Yeah.
that how Hood started? He is a thief. Did he steal the secrets of another entity,
Yeah.
or another
Yeah.
sorcerer? Because you do get the implication. I don't think it ever states it outright, but you do get the implication that Hood was a man at one time. He was a
Yeah, I
human
think
being.
so. I think so. Well, and the fact that ultimately, his final form is humanoid,
It's
right? I mean,
humanoid, yeah.
at the point at which he kills Rictus and retakes his stolen power and
Yeah.
then reforms a physical form. And that's nice too, the fact that in the final confrontation Hood is stripped of most of his power,
Yeah.
but there's still enough left for him to be dangerous and lethal. I love that.
Yeah, I like
I
that
love
too.
the fact that he's diminished but still clearly
Still there, because it's life for life's sake, isn't it? Everything about
Yeah.
Hood is life. He's got to live. For whatever reason, I mean, his existence doesn't seem to be that particularly happy or fulfilling, but it's just life for life's sake, isn't it? Everything about him is
Yeah.
animate.
Yeah, but I also like it in storytelling terms because I love the feeling of like Harvey did everything he needed to do and everything he should, quote unquote, should have
Yep.
done to beat this guy, and it was almost enough.
It was almost enough, yeah.
But
And-
now you're out of tricks, and now
Yeah.
he's physical, and now he's just, this is no more, Devil went down to Georgia trying to beat him at your fiddle playing. This fucker's just going to kill you now.
Yeah.
And he's physical, and you're stuck,
Yeah.
and you're out of ideas because you've used all your ideas up to get to this point. And I love that. I love
Yeah.
that final narrative twist. It's so exciting, and I love how it is rooted in Rictus,
Yeah.
who has just gone, actually,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
such a great moment.
Yeah.
It's really exciting.
It's also, I mean, you almost get the impression that maybe Hood has preempted that. He knows Richter so well, and it's a kind of fail-safe system. If he does happen to collapse or whatever, there's still this little bit of his life force out there, a little bit of his
you could
longevity.
see it either way,
know?
couldn't you? I mean, in retrospect, it seems powerfully unlikely that any of Hood's minions have the ability to hide anything from him.
Yeah, it does seem unlikely, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I still love the moment, and as I say, what I like about it is what it suggests about Richter's agency, because he's so fascinating. He's interesting. I read him when I read the book out loud to Scholar, and I gave him a kind of like an East London accent, like a kind of Arthur Daly type.
Yeah, he's got to be
I gave him that-
charming, doesn't he? A bit
Yeah, exactly.
naughty and a bit charming. The kind of guy that kids would respond to, Slightly sort of children's TV presenter, a little bit of like a performer, a clown. He's got that feeling about him.
Yeah, and I think probably because we'd been watching the latest season of Who, there's maybe a bit of Bradley Walsh in there as well when I was doing it. But it was that kind of vibe, and he was friendly.
Well, he's got to be, doesn't he? He's got to be affable. He's the one who seduces the kids to come to the house,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's why he has more agency than the others, Maybe he's given a little bit more agency because he's got to operate outside the house, doesn't he?
Well, that's what I think it is, because the others, I mean, it's not clear, but certainly, they can't all travel outside.
No.
Because it goes disastrously wrong.
It does go wrong. I mean,
for Kana, when Kana tries to pursue them through the mist.
Yeah.
That's actually a great moment as well. Because again, that's a moment where you think they're completely fucked. When they get through and Kana swings back round to get them, you're like, well, you're done. You've got nowhere to go now. And it's really I love that. That's a really good moment.
I'm actually just flicking through this. I've got this really big hardbound copy of The Thief of All Ways. It was given to me as a gift. It's signed by Barker.
Oh, lovely.
And it's got Barker's illustrations all the way through it. And the
illustrations are in the paperback as well.
They are. They're beautiful, aren't they?
They're gorgeous.
They work so well. But there is a really big picture of Mr. Hood at the end, his sort of fractured face with the glass eyes and the boards and things making up the features of his face. It's absolutely wonderful.
Is that with the pointy tongue?
That's
and the
the
sharp
one.
teeth?
Yeah,
I'm looking
love
at
it.
now.
Love it.
I love the nail through his ear.
Yeah.
Implying it's like a board of floorboard or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that conceit, having him actually like the house be his anatomy.
Yeah.
Is absolutely
it's
brilliant.
so good.
It's
such a
love
great
that.
moment.
I mean, going back to the characters like Kana and whatnot for a moment, and one of the things I really love about all of them is they are not simplistic. Even when it's revealed that they're basically antagonists, there is still this element of almost sympathy for them, particularly at their ends. It's almost like he's doing,
Yeah.
they've been part of this house. They've been functionaries for so long. Particularly Kana, they just want to go.
Well, that's it, and I mean that's what's so interesting about Ma when Ma's magic is turned upon herself, and she's forced to turn herself into what she imagines. What she imagines is nothing,
It's
and that's
nothing,
really
yeah.
powerful. But the other one, of course, arguably even more sympathetic is Mrs. Griffin.
Mrs. Griffin is the most sympathetic of them, isn't she? Because she isn't hostile.
No, well, I mean, it turns out she's potentially the first of the child victims of the
Yeah.
house, right?
Yeah.
And God knows how many thousands of years ago that was at this point, right? Because she's,
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's the other thing I like, because she's an old woman when Harvey gets there. Well, if the house preserves you and
Yeah.
preserves your life force, then how old must she be to still,
Yeah,
to have
right.
become that physically old? It's so good.
Yeah, she could actually be ancient, couldn't she?
Right.
Yeah, she could be from sort of like another age entirely.
And she's deeply sympathetic.
Yeah, because she has seen the children come and go, hasn't she?
Yeah.
She knows. I mean, she's aware of what's happening to a degree in the house.
Yeah, and she's trapped by it. She's
Yeah.
trapped by the power of it completely. And she's. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? She represents. I think for me, God, this is. I don't know why I've been thinking about this so much. So I guess it's because of a. I think I do know why. I think it's because of what's going on in the world. And I've been thinking about. I don't want to talk too much about it, but it's the next thing I'll be working on, probably the next novel I'm going to work on once I've finished the ones I'm working on now.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that's about is about when your employment means that you're in some sense part of a state apparatus.
Yeah.
In whatever function, whether it's a civil servant or whether it's a social worker or whether it's a nurse or a doctor or
A
you're
means
still,
assessor.
or a police officer or a means assessor, but you're part of your, I mean, you are an agent of the state in some sense,
Yeah.
right? In all of those roles, you are actually employed by the state, and
Yeah.
you're an agent of the state, certainly in the UK anyway.
Absolutely.
When the state changes and becomes something you no longer recognise as moral,
Yeah.
What are your responsibilities and how do you act
Yeah.
in that situation? And obviously it's complicated by the fact that you have a personal interest in keeping your job and staying alive,
Yep.
right? So you have a completely selfish but understandable reason for, and then likely you've got a family that you're supporting and responsible for as well. So there's that, and then it's like, so what are the decisions you make there?
Yeah.
Now obviously the heroic answer is you do what Harvey does and you tear the
Yes.
whole fucking thing down.
You pull
But-
it down, yeah.
Right, but Mrs. Griffith, to me, she represents the thing of like where you either don't have that power or don't realise you have that power.
Mm-hmm.
She represents accommodation.
Yeah.
And for me, she's like, okay, I can't stop the house from doing what it does. I can't stop children from coming here, and I can at least make their time here as
Yes.
pleasant as is humanly possible.
Yeah.
And of course, ultimately, in this narrative, that means she's part of the problem.
Yes, it does.
Because
But
she helps perpetuate it, but her motives are the best possible motives,
Yeah.
and I love that. And again, this is a fucking kids' book. How
Yeah.
complex a moral kind of, how complex a moral situation is this putting?
Well,
in a
asking kids to
fucking
grapple
book?
with that
Right,
is
exactly.
very. It's a tall ask, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
very hard. I mean, this character who they probably like a lot,
Yes,
because she is very likable. She's one of the most likable characters in it, who ultimately turns out to be part of not the sort of, she's complicit in the evil of the book.
absolutely.
Um,
And yet the book does not judge her, and Barker does
No,
not judge
no,
her.
it doesn't.
And it's explicit. And ultimately, she's so happy when Harvey prevails because it's her
Yeah.
salvation as much as
Yeah.
anybody else's. But I just think what a complex character. What a great idea. And of course,
yeah.
she's so devastated about the cats too, because
Yeah.
the cats are, they were the last big gift the house gave her as a kid.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's absolutely superb.
That is a brilliant piece of writing. For a children's book, it's wonderful. It is. Again, it echoes certain things that occur throughout Barker's fiction. You often, even the characters who are like the worst of the worst in Barker's fiction, are often complexified in ways they wouldn't be in other bits of fiction. They often have dimensions that they otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah,
no,
absolutely.
Even when they are being execrable, even when they are being absolutely terrible, there is often this note of sympathy for them. I don't think Barker is interested in evil for evil's sake, for example, or monsters for monstrosity's sake. They're always going to have some other dimension to them. It is never going to be the case that, right, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys, and this is how it works, you know?
I mean, the other interesting thing I'm just thinking about, certainly in the terms of Weaveworld, I think from my vague memories in terms of Imagica, and there's the shades of this in Great and Secret Show as well. In a lot of cases, the supposed, I mean, you know, the heroic characters and the villainous characters are yearning for the same thing.
Very often, yeah.
You know,
in Imagica, that's definitely the case.
Yeah,
in
but
Imagica,
I think even in Weaveworld,
yeah.
I mean, they're after the weave for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But they yearn the same thing. You know, they're yearning for the same. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's motivation, isn't there? It's not just there's complexity, even in characters like Shadwell, who is probably one of the most hateful characters in Barker's fiction, to be honest. He probably is one of the most unambiguously hateful.
He is evil. I mean, he's absolutely evil.
But again, there are these complexities to the guy. Yeah. You know, he changes a lot. You get the impression of a broken man. You know, a man who I think we spoke about in the Weaveworld episode, who is hollow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And everything he's doing is an attempt to feed that void pointlessly.
Yeah, and like Mr. Hood. Like Mr. Hood. I mean, hollowness is a big thing in Barker. I mean, even in something like Cold Heart Canyon. One of the antagonists in that book, Katya Lupi, again, there is this very similar thing where she is this immortal. She's found some mechanism to make herself immortal, essentially. But the result of that is a kind of emptiness. There's very little inside left, you know?
I think the other thing that's interesting about Hood, though, on that score, is that I think there's a real sense that Hood probably doesn't even consider himself to be evil.
No.
You know, I think Hood's probably just sees it as a purely transactional thing.
Oh yeah,
you know, Hood
absolutely.
Is just like, look, I give him I give him a carefree, you know, infinitely joyous childhood with no responsibilities, no pain, no cares, no worries.
There is a way of rationalising it, isn't there?
And they last as long as they last, but I get what I want, they get what they want.
And not only that, but what lives would they live out there?
Well,
I mean,
exactly.
At least in here, they don't know any misery, they don't know any disappointment, their lives are brief, but they're worth living. You know, there is a rationalisation there that occurs.
And you get the sense that that's some of what's going on with Mrs. Griffin as well. That's probably how she's sort of found a way to live with herself. But yeah, and I like that. I like that it's not too, you know, it's not a moustache twirling, cackling evil.
No.
It really is, you know, because I mean, as we know, most of the time in real life, people convince themselves of the morality of their evil acts. I mean, that's how they do it.
That's where it comes from, isn't it?
There's always a rationalisation, whether it's pre or post hoc, but it's always.
I was just following orders. I was just doing my job.
Well, you know, it's necessary for the preservation and survival of my tribe / race /
country,
you know. Right,
etc.
Yeah,
it is. There those structures of rationalisation. That's what you get in Mr. Hood, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? I was thinking particularly about, I don't know if you caught it, the BBC recently did a 3-parter on Rise of the Nazis, which was a really impressive.
I didn't, unfortunately. I've heard a lot about it, but
it was really good. But one of the many strains that you pull out of that is one of the things that Nazis were absolutely obsessed with is the notion of decency.
Yeah.
Absolutely obsessed with it, which sounds
absurd on the face of it, doesn't it?
Yeah, given what they did, given the obscenity that they represent, you know, in world history. But it's true. It's absolutely, you know, there's this real, you know, their identity was deeply bound up in a notion of decency, and that's what we're talking about, isn't it? The ability to redefine what you're doing from something evil and to transmute it from something evil to something good by rationalization and by, you know,
to normalise effectively.
Yeah, exactly. To normalise, and it's just, again, you know, this is a fucking kids' book, man.
Right. I mean, the fact that it is engendering these questions, and I imagine many kids would not grapple with them consciously, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The questions will be there. The ambiguity will be there. It will settle somewhere in the sediment of subconscious. You know.
And look, the other thing that's interesting is that. The flip side of this is one of the ways that, I mean, the Thief of Always could, it isn't, but it could have become quite a, at least small c, conservative narrative.
Yeah.
Because there is a notion of, I mean, like, I think a bad reading of it, but one reading of The Thief of Always might be, there is no meaningful development without suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's what The Thief of Always is saying.
So
but
basically, Schopenhauerian reading of The Thief of Always.
Yeah, but you could read that implication, right? Because if you look at how I just described the Hood House, well, it's a childhood free from want, it's a childhood free from distraction of, an imposition and responsibility. Well, you could read that as quite a kind of, quite a small C conservative kind of, pull your socks up, get on with life. You don't, not everything's fun. Blah 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 blah.
There is that element to it. It's a dimension that exists within the book, definitely.
But the novel completely subverts that in the final chapter, where you get to go back when Harvey, because he does fix everything. He does get to go back. Yeah. He gets to go back to his life. But he takes you back to the beginning. Yeah. The whole reason he's there in the first place is because he's bored.
Yeah.
It's February and it's boring.
Yeah.
Everything is boring. He's got nothing to do. He's got no excitement. And what the lesson he takes back from the house is, every fucking day is exciting.
Yeah, and every day is kind of a gift, yeah?
And every day is an invitation to adventure, so grab it by both fucking hands. Well, that's not a small C conservative message at all.
No, it's actually a progressive message.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a big-ass
really
progressive message, yeah.
Exactly.
It's very
so
clever.
It ends up... what's interesting, though, is what that means is it ends up not being about any of the things it looks like it's about all the way through. It's not about the passage of time. It's not about the notion of idealistic childhood versus suffering. It's not about any of those things. It's actually about, like, and I tell you what, that was the other thing, rereading it this time, I read the whole thing, I really enjoyed it, I got to the last chapter and I got a lump in my throat.
Yeah,
reading that last chapter, it completely got me. It was that sentiment at the very end. It was literally the last couple of paragraphs about, like, from now on no day would be boring.
Yeah.
Each day was a gift, and he intended to live it to its fullest. And it's just like, fucking hell, man.
It's it's a difficult thing to handle in children's fiction. There is a tendency for it to be over didactic, to be over finger wagging, and for it's their lessons to be overly simplistic. This manages it quite beautifully because it is not. It's not a conservative lesson. That's the thing. It's not about obeying. It's not about doing as you're told. It's not about. That's right. It's actually kind of about the opposite.
But it's also saying about recognize different forms of authority too, because that's the thing. It's like the Hood House ostensibly is a place of freedom, but actually it's not. It's another set of rules. It's another set of restrictions, and ultimately it's ruled by another authority that's every bit as merciless, if not more, than the authority outside the house.
Absolutely, yeah. It's very clever in that regard because it does... I mean, that's something... That is a really powerful lesson for children. Do not take things at face value.
Yeah, that's right. But also the key in both cases, in both worlds, the key to freedom is imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
Because it's the imagination that gets him out of the house and defeats her, but it's also the imagination that means he's going to have no more boring days.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's like everything. I mean, ultimately, if there is like a recurrent theme, a recurrent lesson that Barker tries to hammer home with everything he writes, it's about extolling the virtues of imagination above and beyond everything else.
Yeah.
Everything. I mean, have you read his other children's books, The Aberrat?
No, this is literally the only one I've read.
Right. Well, The Aberrat is a series of books, and it is unfinished, so if you do start reading it, you may have to prepare Scarlett for this as well. If you do read it together, don't expect it to end. All right, but you have that exact thing going on. It's basically Alice in Wonderland as written by Clive Barker.
Okay.
It is insane. It's about an archipelago of islands, and each island is an hour in the day. There are 24 altogether.
Right.
And each one has its ethos, and its nature refers to the ethos of the hour.
Okay.
So the Midnight Island, my personal favourite, is Gorgosium, which is the island of horrors.
Right.
Ruled by the Carrion family, all of whom are horrific beyond imagining, And it's about a girl named Candy who is swept up by a magical wave and taken to this archipelago. And it's absolutely beautiful. Now, one of the islands, I can't remember which one it is. I think it's ruled by a guy called the Comexo Kid, and it's like Disneyland. The island is like Disneyland. It's all commercialized. It's all like theme park rides and whatnot. And he is essentially the bad guy.
Right.
He doesn't come
That's
across as the bad guy.
nice. No,
He
sure.
doesn't feel like the bad guy, but he is, because
Nice.
he wants to take the other islands and make them like his.
Right.
He wants to bring
Right.
light to them, synthetic light. He wants
Yeah.
to, plow away the mountains and set up these big synthetic rides and hotels and whatnot. And I think that tells you a lot about the nature of evil in Barker's perspectives. It really does. I mean, you have all of these horrors on the Gorgosium Isle, for example, and they are
Right.
horrific.
Yeah.
They are absolutely horrific, but they are presented much more sympathetically than the Comexo Kid. I can tell you that. It's quite brilliant. I mean, it's beautiful. It's based on Barker's paintings, and I would advise, if you do get it, get the hardback ones, because the
Okay.
paintings are in it
Right.
then, and it's wonderful. It's really good fun. Big problem, it doesn't end.
Yeah. Well.
Big problem. But it is interesting. It's fascinating to me that Barker can turn his hand to this stuff.
Yeah.
It
I mean,
really
yeah.
is.
And that was the thing for me. Part of my reading it was just like, how the hell did this?
Right. Well, do you?
Because I think of him as such an adult writer.
Well, absolutely.
You know?
Do you know the story of The Thief of Always? How it came to be?
No.
Well, he's always wanted to write children's books. He has been inspired by children's writing since he was a kid, and some of his
Sure.
favourites are things like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and whatnot. Whose influence is very clear in all of his work. So once he got to a particular position, he had a chance. Obviously, he can write pretty much what he likes. Wrote The Thief of Always, did lots of illustrations for it, lots of paintings and whatnot. Took it to his publishers, and they said, "Not a chance." Not a chance. Nobody is going to buy a children's book with your name on it.
Yeah.
Nobody. I mean, look, given what people know you for,
Yep.
do you honestly think people are going to buy a children's book by the Pinhead guy, by the Cenobite guy? Of course they're not. So he sold it to them for a dime.
Right.
So they had no choice but to make money off of it. They were going to make money regardless.
Yeah.
So he's never made any money off of it.
Huh.
Yeah. How bizarre is that? And of course it did sell to
Yeah,
children and adults alike. It actually did
it's
really
great.
bloody well.
I mean, that's the only other thing I was thinking about reading. It was like, I'm really surprised this one hasn't had a big screen adaptation.
Well,
'cause
there were talks.
Yeah.
Like everything of Barker's, everything. There have been projects. There was a contract to do it with a really big Jim Henson.
Oh,
It was to do a
wow.
Jim Henson
my
adaptation of
God.
it, and it fell through. It got to the point where it was almost being made. It was
Yeah.
almost being made. If they could do it, and if they could sort of capture, the feeling of the adaptation of Coraline,
Yeah.
which is
yeah.
absolutely gorgeous, and it treads very similar themes and a very similar vibe.
You could do it. I mean, if you could get, Tim Burton's the obvious
Tim Burton would be great. I mean,
first thought for director. He could probably get it to work. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's
the team behind the people who did The Dark Crystal for Netflix, that would be
yeah.
wonderful.
I mean, it's the thing is, it's the right length, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like most of the time, the problem with a novel is it's actually too long to make a proper film narrative
I
out
tell
unless
ya.
you slice it up. This is such a compact novel.
You look into the background of the potential adaptations that almost were for a
Yeah.
lot of Barker's books, and some of them have even started production,
Right.
and they just fall through. They just fall flat because they can't be done. It's
No.
so difficult to realise them on a number of levels, not least of which is narratively, funnily enough. Realising them visually is really bloody hard.
Yeah, of course it is. But even just the narrative scope of like Imagica or Great and Secret Show or Weave World. It defies even a long, like a 3-hour movie.
Absolutely. Well,
You couldn't.
I've heard that the rumbling on the grapevine is that there is a TV adaptation of Imagica in production by some
Yeah.
big American.
That's the way to go, isn't it?
It's the way to do it, but I
Yeah.
still don't know how the hell they're going to do it. I don't envy them. Let's put it that way.
No, indeed.
I don't envy them because, how are they going to visualize certain things? I just don't. Pyopa.
Right.
How do
Who's
you...
so important. Such an absolutely critical part of that mythos.
If they get Pyopa wrong, the whole thing falls flat.
Yeah, they fuck up the whole
It's
thing.
essentially that. It just falls flat. and it's not just the metaphysics either. It's everything else. The sex, it's got to be in it. It's got to be in it. How do you do it?
Yeah.
How do you? I don't know. I honestly have no idea. I do not envy anyone who adapts any of Barker's works.
Good luck taking a swing at that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
right. I mean, The Thief of Always is probably the one that's one of the most adaptable.
I think it's doable. I really do.
Yeah.
Because it's such. I mean, it's such intentionally. It's such primary colours.
It is. It's so
because of the
visual,
audience
isn't
saying
it?
that.
It's so visual, and it's kind of written in a slightly scriptic format anyway.
Yeah.
You know, it would work really well as a film, I think. It would work really well as a children's film. Slightly long one, maybe, but I would love to see it. Animated. I would love to see it as an animated film.
Yeah, it could. That would work really well.
Or with puppetry or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Even stop motion. Stop motion would be awesome. I would go for that if it was stop motion. I think it would be beautiful.
Well, I think you'd at least have to do the physical manifestation of Hood at the end. That would have to be.
Oh, so I mean,
that would be so cool.
It would be so good as a stop motion animation because it would have that right sort of slightly ethereal, jerky, not quite right feeling.
Yeah, I mean
about
that's it, isn't it? It's that same thing with. I mean, the reason the stop motion Robocop works so well is because ED209 is a bit shit.
Yeah.
So actually, the fact that the motion is slightly jerky fits with the fiction of like,
Yes.
because it's a slightly jerky robot because it kind of sucks. So it feeds into the fiction in a beautiful way.
Yeah, it
And it would be
does.
very similar with this because the Hood house at the end. By the time he's maintained that form, dude's a mess.
Well, he's falling to bits, isn't he? He's like literally nailed together. He's splinters and fragments of the house. Yeah. I would love to see it. I mean, there was when the Abarat came out. There was, of all things, there was a contract with Disney to do a series of films of the Abarat. Never transpired.
It's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, Disney's such a behemoth now, and they've gone so far beyond. I mean, obviously the core Disney brand still exists, and the Disney movies are what we expect them to be. But they've encompassed so much more now between Lucasfilms and Jim Henson
And
Studios,
Marvel and everything
right?
else.
There is more space to play than there used to be for them, and you can't help but feel like they could maybe handle something as spiky as
Well, the thing is, they'd have the money, wouldn't they? That's the thing. The money and the connections, the studios, the means would be there.
Yeah.
That's definitely the case. I mean, there are problems that come with that. Obviously, there's the corporate influence, which I think part of the problem is Barker. I think Barker himself intervenes in a lot of these things. I know for a fact that he has the rights to all of his stories. They belong to him.
Right.
And he has a real problem with adaptations of them by and large. The only one he's ever liked, barring the ones he's done himself, is the Candyman.
Okay.
Which he thought was amazing. All the others he doesn't like.
Yeah, it's a pretty fucking good movie.
Well, Candyman is stunning. I mean, it's probably the best adaptation of Barker's work, to be honest. And I get the impression that when things don't go the way he likes them to, he just says, well, no. Stop it right now. You're not going to do it.
Well, let's be honest. I mean, if you'd seen, I mean, I think Hellbound's one of the great part twos of all time. But if you'd seen what happened subsequent to that, to the Hellraiser franchise, you could see. I mean, he obviously parted with the rights to that at some point.
Yeah, he bowed out of that one.
Right, and you could see how that experience might not have endeared him to the idea of.
Oh, he's really critical.
Back into cinema.
Oh, he's hypercritical, despite the fact. I mean, he lives in LA and he's kind of part of the Hollywood machinery in many respects. I mean, people don't seem to realize he's a real player in Hollywood.
Absolutely.
He funds massive projects, gets them off the ground and whatnot.
I remember seeing him turn up in the credits to Gods and Monsters and be like, aha.
Yep.
I see you, Mr. Barker.
Exactly. There is a great, there was an interview between him and Ian McKellen, who is obviously a big part of Gods and Monsters, and it's awesome.
Oh no, I'm going to have to check that out because
awesome.
I'm such a big fan of both of those two, and I can imagine that being a very interesting conversation.
But
actually.
Barker hates Hollywood.
Right.
He absolutely, and he gets really excoriating in some of his. I mean, he just goes for it. I mean, he's very florid as well. He just tells you what the board meetings are like, and he says in one of his interviews, he said when we were making, I think it was Hellraiser 2, right?
Yeah.
we had someone come into one of the board meetings and say, oh, well, we don't really have room for a horror film at the moment in our schedule, but we'd really like to make it into a rock opera.
Oh my
And she was deathly serious. He thought she was joking.
See, I wouldn't mind seeing a Clive Barker rock opera at some point.
No.
Like, that would be fucking amazing, but really?
Yeah,
Like,
right?
Hellbound?
Right.
No.
He is excoriating about his experience. I mean, if you really want to see it, read Cold Heart Canyon.
Okay.
Because that's what it's about. It's
Right,
about
okay.
because it is about Hollywood. It's about the old ghosts of Hollywood, essentially. And he just
Right.
goes for the underbelly. Like, he really goes for exposing all the nasty, vile, like, secrets of stardom in Hollywood. He really turns the whole mythology of the place on its head. And you get the bitterness of that
Yeah.
book. Oh, God.
It's really interesting. I mean, I know it's sort of a bit of a digression,
Yes.
but one of the things I found absolutely fascinating, there was a podcast I was listening to for a while. It was one of the, so you know, the Nerdist has like
Yep.
about, I don't know, 24 shows at this point. One of them is for it's called the Writers Panel,
Yep.
I think, if I can remember rightly. And I listened to that for about a year or two, and it was really good because it was a weekly thing, and it was, you know, it was TV writers.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, they had a load of different people, but you get people from all kinds of long-running shows talking about what it's like working in writing and working in. But one of the stories that you got again and again and again from these people who are, you know, steadily working now in TV and various writers' rooms was, I spent about 5 or 10 years in Hollywood getting good money to write scripts that didn't get made.
Yeah.
And eventually I just thought, you know, I'm going to go to TV because the pay's not as good, but at least I'll actually see something on screen.
Yeah, I mean, Neil Gaiman put it beautifully. Because he's been trying to break into film for years, right?
Forever, yeah,
And
right.
he was saying Hollywood is the weirdest place. Like, he says in fairy tales, you spin straw into gold, and in the morning, the gold turns to straw and blows away. In Hollywood, the gold stays where it is. You keep the money, but the ideas and the magic just turn into nothing and float away.
Yeah, and it
It's-
is strange.
It's
Yeah,
weird, man. I mean, and Barker hates it. I mean, it's why he bowed out, ultimately.
Right.
It's why he bowed out of making films. He loathed the whole process. He hated it.
well, yeah,
And why he just went into funding projects that he believed in, basically.
sure.
But I get the impression that because he holds on to a lot of his stuff quite jealously, and rightfully so, I'd be exactly the same. A lot of it is uncompromising and so doesn't get made. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Beyond the obvious problems of adapting the material, which is evident, you know.
Yes, absolutely. But I do think this one, I really hope it would be a good one to do.
Well, you know, given that it was so phenomenally successful,
Yeah.
and we are going to get a slew of Stephen King adaptations now, and we are going to get, I would imagine, I would not be surprised to see some Ramsey Campbell adaptations. I wouldn't be surprised to
please
see...
God.
I wouldn't be surprised to see some Lovecraft stuff cropping up very soon.
Oh, that'd be interesting, yeah.
I'm sure there must be somewhere in Hollywood, like people looking back at the horror writers of the 80s and thinking, right, what can we adapt? What can we
Yeah.
make as successful as it was? And of course, Barker is the next in line.
He's sitting right there, isn't
It's
he?
and also, unlike King, who has been adapted to death.
Well, this is it, isn't it? Because most of the big King titles you go, I mean, there's no need to remake Christine.
Nope.
The Carpenter version's fine.
Yep.
It's not perfect, but it's fine.
But it's good. It does what it's supposed to do. You know?
It'll do the job. I mean, Cujo.
Cujo, they
You're not
could
going to
do-
remake.
yeah.
You're not going to remake The Shining, are you?
No, but he's already done that. King
Well,
did
exactly.
it himself,
but-
and it was
yeah,
shit.
Well, exactly. So there's two good reasons not to do it. One, because Kubrick did it as well as you ever could,
Yep.
and two, King showed what happens if you try and do it
Yep.
not be Kubrick.
Yeah.
So there's no reason on earth to do that.
Yeah.
So most of the rest of the like you say, it's been adapted. I mean, the dark half.
Yeah.
You got a George Romero movie.
Right.
What the hell do you want? You know?
It's either it's been done, and it's often been done quite badly. It has to be said. If they're going to do King, they should do a TV adaptation of The Dark Tower. I mean, come on.
That's the
Come
one, isn't
on.
it? Yeah, you could do an amazing like HBO 5 or 6 season arc.
If
of
they
the Dark
did
Tower,
that
would be
right,
wonderful. Yeah, no, it would be
blow
amazing.
like the likes of Game of Thrones and what it would blow them all out of the water.
It would be cool. I mean, it's the thing about it is what I love about Dark Tower. As much as the narrative is gigantic and really involved, the basic premise of I want to do the Lord of the Rings, but in a Sergio Leone western.
Yeah, right. Awesome.
Fucking hell, come on.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how you can't go for that.
But it's also inherently cinematic.
Yeah, of course it is. Well, I mean, the cinematic influences in the Dark Tower are so overt.
No, the Legion.
I mean, they're overt, aren't they? I mean,
yeah, they are.
From
well, especially from book 5 onwards, when he worked out what it was about. Right?
Yeah, when he actually
you start
got an
getting
idea
Sneetches and Doctor
yeah.
Doom turning up.
Yeah, the Wizard of Oz moments, you know. I mean, come on, it's all there, isn't it? It's all there. I mean, you could draw on so much to make those films so cine literate and so clever.
Yeah.
Oh, ideally, I want Frank Darabont to do it.
Yeah, obviously, because he knows what he's fucking doing.
Well, he gets King, doesn't he?
He does get King.
Whenever he does a King adaptation, it's perfect.
Yeah.
He just gets it. He understands. Yeah. But come on, why don't they do the weird stuff? Why do they always go for like the stuff that people already know and that they're already familiar with? Oh, it's Pet Sematary again. Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Fine.
See, how is it we've had nothing against Pet Sematary, but how is it we've had 2 Pet Sematary movies and we haven't had The Girl Who Loves Tom Gordon?
Yeah,
yet?
right.
Because I mean, come on.
Yeah, absolutely. I meant to ask, have you seen the adaptation of Desperation?
No, I haven't. I know it exists, but
don't.
Nah.
Please don't. I mean,
I'm not. You know.
I wanted to see it because Collie Entragian is played by Ron Perlman.
Right, who's awesome.
Perfect. I mean, it's absolutely perfect casting.
Yep.
It's awful.
Oh, it's so shame.
It's execrably bad. I mean, on like it's bad on a technical level. It is shot terribly.
Right.
I don't know what's going on, but it was made in the early 2000s, right? And it's shot like from like an X-Files episode.
Blimey.
That's what it feels like something from the mid-90s. And not something good either, you know. It's
because I never saw Needful Things either.
Needful Things is all right. Needful Things has got stuff going for it. I mean, for one thing, it's got who is it who plays Leland Gaunt?
Ed Harris, isn't it?
Ed Harris is in it, but I can't remember who it is who plays Leland Gaunt.
He plays Gaunt. No, I can picture him, but I can't remember.
It's not Frank Langella, is it?
I can't remember.
I think it is Frank Langella, and he has a ball.
Right.
You know, he's having such fun. And it does draw, like, that whole criticism of small town USA.
I tell you what, I think Needful Things really is one of King's. I think it's a fucking masterpiece, that book. I think it really is underrated, Needful Things.
All of those nasty, horrible little tensions that are just everywhere, you know? Because Leland Gaunt doesn't do anything. That's the genius.
He just gives a very gentle nudge to all the shit that's already there. It's
all already there.
Fucking great.
That's the brilliance of him. I mean, I love Leland Gaunt as a cat. I love him.
And I love the idea, you know, he's been doing it for thousands of years. He just travels around the country, travels around the world probably, you know, because these are human traits. And he just pops up and he's like, gets the lay of the land. And he's like, right.
And does next to nothing.
Does next to nothing. Just sets the wiring up. Throws a switch.
Utterly brilliant. I love that.
It's great.
But again, it's not one that's often regarded, is it? It's not often mentioned.
No, it's funny. I think there's a thing about. Well, I think part of it is because it's a comedy, and I think people don't realise it's a comedy.
It is funny.
Yeah, it is.
It is funny. Gaunt himself is funny.
Gaunt's funny, but also just like I mean, you just get to a certain point where you realise with the conflict. I mean, the point at which the Baptists and the Catholics are just having a mass fist fight in the middle of the street.
Yeah, love it. Love
and it's just like, oh, hang on a minute.
Yeah, the meanness that comes out as well. You know, the sheer human cruelty that he brings out it's just awesome. It is.
But I also love,
awesome.
he does all that, but he also doesn't. I mean, even as it's funny, he doesn't stint on the violence of it either. I mean, it's both at the same time. It's fantastically cruel.
Yeah, it totally.
At the same time that it's funny, and he doesn't. That's what I like about it. Actually, is he doesn't compromise on either facet. He just keeps upping the ante with it as it goes along. I love that book.
And it's a lovely concept as well. I just love the concept of this
brilliant.
little old curiosity shop.
Yeah, so wonderful.
That just crops up.
And that whole thing about, I mean, that's the oddest thing, because one of my other favourite favourite subgenres of horror is the Deal with the Devil. I
Yeah.
just love those stories. I've always loved Deal
Yeah,
with the
the
Devil stories.
Faustian thing, yeah?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
wonderful.
well,
And
it's
got.
so well established, isn't it?
I think what I like about it is two things. I love how it's incredibly mannered and structured.
Mhm.
You know, there aren't many other subgenres of fiction that are as structured as a Deal with the
No.
Devil story. They're very clear 3 acts. They're very
Yeah.
clear, and yet it's still, with a very, very rigid form, has almost infinite malleability.
Yeah,
to
and
it.
again, it's infinitely adaptable, isn't it? It's been done
Yeah.
again and again and again in so many different forms. I mean, Hellraiser's
Right.
that narrative, isn't it? It's the Faustian
It is actually,
pact,
yeah,
you
it's
know?
a version of that. But what I love is what I think is that Deal with the Devil stories also reveal an awful lot about the authors.
Yeah.
Because of that malleability, they tell you about what the authors really think about the devil, what they think about evil, what they think about
Humanity,
the compromises you make with evil, and humanity and humanity's interaction with evil and relationship to evil. Fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
So revealing, you know.
It really, really is. I love that stuff too. I mean, how can you not? I mean, if you've ever read like Christopher Marlowe or anything like that, you just can't not love it, you know?
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's a. I mean, I always go on about it. But there's a Robert Bloch called This Hellbound Train. I think it's one of the finest versions. I remember reading that as a kid in one of my dad's science fiction magazines and just been like, okay, this is glorious. And King's done a couple. There's a few.
King's done
others
quite a
around
lot, hasn't he? I mean, that Deal with the Devil thing comes up a lot in his stuff.
Yeah, I think he's done a few shorts. My favourite one was Fair Extension, which was in Full Dark No Stars, which is. It's one of my favourite King stories of all time. Full Dark No Stars is interesting because everyone talks about the other three because they're longer and they're really. I mean, they're ugly, hard, punishing stories. Full Dark No Stars, you know, is a really, as the title implies, it's almost Bachman-esque.
Yeah,
You know, it's right.
It's
at
a
that end
nasty
of the
piece of
pool.
work, isn't it?
It is a nasty piece of work, absolutely. But for my money, Fair Extension is the nastiest of the lot, and it's a very short. It is a Deal with the Devil story, and it's wonderful. It's absolutely because it really is about like the real monster is not the devil; it's the guy making the deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Barker's
he's
done it a lot
snapped.
too. I mean, it's one of his key stories, which is The Last Illusion, from which became Lord
Yes,
of Illusions,
indeed.
obviously.
Yes, indeed.
But that turns it on its head, where
Yes.
you've got not the devil reneging on the contract or finding a subclause. You've actually got the human doing it. Which is really clever. So he takes like the illusionist takes the magic of hell that the devil gave him and then starts doing parlor tricks with it
Yeah, that's
to
right.
upset hell.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Because the whole thing is like, how did he do that trick?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, actually, because it's magic.
Because it's real. Because it's magic. That's why. Yeah. I love
But in an odd way, that's interesting. It brings us full circle. But The Thief of Always is almost a Deal with the Devil story as well.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's there. Absolutely, there's a Faustian pact. I mean, it's something.
There is.
I mean, it's unconscious in this one.
Well, that's what I like about it, is that in The Thief of Always, it's insidious.
Yeah.
It's implied. And one of the reasons that, you know, Harvey gets into trouble is because he's not playing by the unwritten rules.
Yeah.
He's not obeying the kind of unwritten scriptures of the pact, which is like, we give you everything you want, and you shut the fuck up and enjoy
That's right,
it.
you do. Yeah, that's right, you enjoy, yeah?
Yeah.
And don't cause any problems. You
Sit there, enjoy, consume,
Yep,
and don't think too much about what's going on.
that's right. Don't worry about it, yeah?
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, or in this
Exactly.
case, the lake behind the house.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a really obvious allegory going on there, isn't there? The Wizard of Oz, yeah, definitely. But it's revealing the hideousness of that concept, like the darkness of that notion, you know?
But there's also something very elementally Barkerian about the idea of, like, you know, one of the messages of the book is like, go to the place they tell you not to go.
Yeah, that's what Barker's protagonists do, though. They aren't like protagonists in other books. They're really not. They will do the most perverse thing imaginable, often. Often because they want to do it. Out of perversity, it's because they want to do it. And they often act shockingly, the protagonists. You know, you'll find them, like, doing things that, like, even, like, say, a king protagonist would never do.
No, that's right.
Never
But
do.
it comes back to that insatiable curiosity, and again with Barker, what's great is that it's that same insatiable curiosity that motivates the heroes and the villains.
Yeah, that's right.
It's that hunger and that need. It's just that the only difference is between those two sets is that the heroes are doing it out of a longing
Yeah.
and a need to connect, whereas the villains are doing it out of a lust for power.
Yeah, it's usually
and a need
selfishness,
to
isn't
control.
it? It's
Yeah.
they've become self-consumed somehow. The villains often in Barker.
Well, and I think control's the key. I
Yeah.
think that the heroes of a Barker story want to be part of the narrative,
That's it.
whereas the villains are obsessed with control.
That's absolutely it. You see it again and again. It's true of
Yeah.
Shadwell. It's true of the Autarch in Imagica.
Yep.
It's true of Kissoon and of the Jaff in the Books of the Art.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it does. And, I mean, Barker does have some sympathy with that too.
Yeah.
You do get it in this. I mean, Hood is not an entirely negative character. None of them are really. I mean, even some of the nastier villains, like the Jaff in the Books of the Art, there's a lot of sympathy drawn with the Jaff.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
a lot. I would argue he actually has more sympathy for the Jaff than he does for his counterpart, Fletcher, who is ostensibly the more positive force.
Sure.
There does seem to be more affection for him in many respects. In the same way there's more affection for Immaculata than there is for Shadwell.
Yeah,
Yeah?
I mean that's absolutely. And I mean, in the case of the Thief of Always, even though the affection is clearly with Harvey,
Yeah.
he gives the devil his due, right?
Yeah.
Hood's not a two-dimensional character. Hood's really interesting.
Yeah, Hood is
And he's-
fascinating. Wouldn't you like to know who he
Yeah.
was?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? As you say, it's the implied mythology behind Hood and behind the Hood's kind of acolytes
Yeah.
or servants or whatever they are.
How did
I mean,
he
Mar
get-
is the other one that's really interesting. Mar's just.
Oh yeah, because Mara's got these implied depths, as does
Yeah.
Kana actually.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
absolutely.
There are these implied complexities all the way through. But wouldn't you love like a prequel to this? What was Hood before
Yeah,
this?
how Hood became Hood. Yeah.
Was he a kid at one point? Was he maybe a kid not unlike Harvey?
Well, and like you say, the kind of Thief of Always. I mean, I think the danger of that is you don't want to end up doing, Star Wars episodes 1 to 3, right?
Yeah, of course. There's always that danger.
we don't want Anakin Hood, who later
Yeah,
becomes.
yeah, of course.
Mr.
Who actually, ultimately, but yeah, I mean, there is potential for that because of the time warping elements of this mythology. There is a
Yeah.
potential for that. But yeah, that is a problem. That can be a problem. Can be done well. It can be done well. I mean, there was no reason why the story of Anakin Skywalker had to be so shit.
No, there isn't. I mean, I do think that inherently the story of a peaceful republic descending to fascism is a downer. I don't think there's any way to avoid that
No, of
being
course
a
it's
downer
a
as a
downer.
narrative.
That's absolutely fine. And for an innocent character to ultimately become this mass murdering fascist, yeah, totally. It just could have been done well. That's the thing,
It's a fundamental issue. isn't
Like
it?
I could have believed it.
Right? Yes.
That's
in any
the big
way.
problem. I could have believed it.
Yeah.
They could have maybe written the Jedi a bit better as well, and not made them out to be these theocratic bastards.
It's just I don't. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, I'm not even that.
Look, it could have been a really good critique about the inability of liberalism to combat fascism, right?
Could have been.
And that's a story we could do with retelling
Yeah.
right now for various important reasons.
It could have been there. It's just not.
But unfortunately,
It's not because it was written and directed by George Lucas. So
George Lucas, sorry, dude,
Yeah, I'm sorry, but he's not a good filmmaker.
he's not.
He's
a
never
good
been a good
filmmaker.
filmmaker.
He's a good ideas man.
yeah,
He's not a good
He's
filmmaker.
never been a good filmmaker. I mean, one of the more incendiary arguments I often have is that the original Star Wars films, as beloved as they are and as important as they were, and I understand why they were, it's because of the special effects. It's not because of the script.
The special effects are absolutely key.
The
They're
script
absolutely
is
key.
terrible.
Yeah.
It's often awful. It's just terrible,
And the second and third movies are better because they're better directed.
Yes, and
I mean,
also written by other people, by all accounts.
Yeah,
So, that
right.
helps.
and it does show.
Of course it does, yeah. I mean, The Empire Strikes Back is probably the best of them. And it's the one that Lucas had the least to do with, by all accounts. So, kind of, does demonstrate, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I do find it amusing that so many people have gone off on the latter day Star Wars films, when actually, in terms of the writing, they're largely much better than the originals. I can tell you that.
Oh, I think. I mean, I didn't care much for Solo, but the other movies they've made have been fantastic. I
I'm
think.
not
really,
that big a fan of the Star Wars films in general. It's just not my thing,
No, fair enough.
I've actually really liked The Force Awakens and the last. What was the last one? The Last Jedi.
Last Jedi, yeah.
I quite liked it. I liked it.
No, I think it's really good
because it poked fun at it as its own fan base.
Well,
That's
I liked it for reasons other than that, but yeah, it did do that. Yeah.
It really did. It preempted their own response and said, actually, no, we're going to grow up a bit, we're going to change things a bit, and we're going to make things a bit more ambiguous. I liked that.
But also, it wanted to, and also it said it's for the kids.
Yeah.
So grow up. I mean, that was the other thing. That ending for me was really explicit. The kid with the broom. It was like, no.
Yeah.
Who's this for, man? Who needs this message?
Absolutely. And it's that rose-tinted goggles thing that people have because they grew up with the Star Wars films. The original ones. They can't seem to see their faults. It's like in any rational sort of with any degree of objectivity. The original Star Wars films, the scripts are not good. The acting is terrible by and large. It's absolutely atrocious by and large. They're not great films. They're great spectacles.
Yeah, and they're beautifully designed.
Yeah,
and I think
the design
the
is great. The ships and the set pieces are generally wonderful. The big space battles are great. But that's...
And the stories, I mean, especially the first movie, the story just coasts on the fact that it's, Campbellian logic, and we know that story because we've seen it a million
times, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. It's really interesting to me because it seems to be one of those ones where a lot of people have those goggles on. A lot of people have those goggles on to the point whereby they cannot accept that stuff that comes later is often better in many ways. Many ways.
It is an odd one, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is an odd... I mean, the one for me is still Rogue One. I think Rogue One was... I'm still kind of astonished Rogue One got made.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really am. I mean, the moment in that stands out to me is a moment where you've got a bunch of people in white armor stealing the natural resources from a desert planet and taking it off in their spaceship to take back to their empire, and they are attacked by a group of people wearing, turbans and desert gear. And the people in turbans who are attacking the Empire, who are the rebels, are the good guys.
Yeah, right.
Like, whoa!
Slightly incendiary.
How in the
really,
fuck did you get this one past anyone?
It is slightly incendiary. I mean,
it's really incendiary in a Star Wars movie.
Right.
Come on.
I mean, another thing that really endears me to the present day Star Wars films is that it's upsetting it's upsetting certain demographics which need to be upset, quite frankly.
But it's also like they're not comfortable. I mean, the thing is, like for me, one of the key things is like the end of The Last Jedi is a fucking downer.
Yeah, it is.
They're down to like 20 odd people in the Millennium Falcon, and it's like, this is shit.
Yeah.
This is not a good place to be.
It's a downer. You're absolutely right. It is a downer, and I like that.
Yeah.
I'm really pleased. It makes me very, very wary of the next one, though, because the backlash was so extreme.
Yeah.
And it was ridiculous. I mean, the backlash was so ridiculously extreme. From so many areas and demographics and whatnot. I fear for the next one, I really do.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is that they're back with JJ, and it's going to be, it'll be like The Force Awakens, it'll be fine.
That's fine, I mean, because,
it'll be fine.
I liked
But The
Force
Last
Awakens.
Jedi just feels to me, as I say, Last Jedi and Rogue One between them, they just feel like this kind of, I'm kind of amazed they have.
Yeah, me too. I can't.
I'm just grateful to have them, whatever happens next.
I can't quite believe that The Last Jedi had the effrontery that it did, to be honest, to sort of stick two fingers right up at the sort of, I hesitate to use the term, but the sort of incel, like MRA, don't like, completely stuck two fingers right up at them and said, fuck you.
Well, none of them seem to have realised yet that Darth Emo is them.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's one of the great portrayal, and like he's the great modern evil, and it's brilliant. It's really. I mean, I don't mean that as an insult. It's great writing. It's great acting.
It's clever.
The character is. Yeah, it's really clever.
It's got depths and cultural resonance that the original Star Wars films never had.
And I love that, and I love the fact that he's worshipping Vader. Like,
Yeah.
I know I'll never be as good as you.
Right.
I mean, the resonance is there, and if that makes you uncomfortable, dude, I've got news for you. You should be uncomfortable. It's embarrassing if that's how you fucking feel.
That's kind of what the film is saying, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the commentary.
They're not the good guys. They were never the good guys.
That's the commentary. I mean, it's like, and they don't get it. You know, I've actually,
No.
you know, I've actually seen people say things like, "Oh, you've got the SJWs coming into our Star Wars and changing it around, and we don't like," as though they own it. That's what I fucking hate. As though they fucking own it, you know?
The original trilogy was a reaction against Vietnam,
Right,
and the evil empire was America.
These fucking idiots who don't understand that these factors are there already because they're so illiterate. That's the point. That's the truth of the matter. They are so fucking illiterate that they can't appreciate nuanced subtext, allegory, you know? So they don't understand that these elements are already there.
Well, and you know, and this is why, like, you know, at a certain point in the conversation, I mean, that's where I got to with this Joker movie, where there was, because I went through the whole range, like when people started saying, oh, you know, it's terrible because people are gonna, you know, people are gonna relate to this character and think he's a hero, and I went through the whole thing of like, no, they're fucking not. No. He's the bad guy. He's always been the bad guy. And I watched the movie and I was like, there's no fucking way. And then, you know, about a week later, I was like, no, of course they are, because you can't do it. You cannot make a satire so perfect that people won't willfully misunderstand it and think you're making the opposite point.
That's also the point as well, isn't it?
So like either abandon making art altogether or just say fuck it, I'm not making art for morons.
That's exactly it.
I'm just not going to do it.
I am not.
And every time I see them, I'm just going to point and laugh and tell them they're morons, but I'm not going to stop. Like, fuck that.
I'm totally with you on that one. Totally with you on that one. It's not, I mean, I take it back. It's not that they're illiterate. It's not that they can't appreciate nuance or that they can't criticize. They actually hide behind that. They can, and they know, and they see. They just ignore it for their own agendas. They're just dishonest. They are fundamentally dishonest.
That's the root. That is the absolute root of it.
It's coded language. What they're actually saying is, we want our pure white... we want our sandpit to be our sandpit, and we don't want anyone else to play in it, even though it was never there in the first place. It's never been our sandpit, you know? That's the point, isn't it? That's the point.
You know, white supremacy is built on a lie. It's built on the lie that the human species can be subdivided beyond the human species, which it cannot. You know, there's no scientific or genetic underpinning to make that division. There just is not. There is one species. They're called humans. That's it. That's the beginning and end. White supremacy requires that not to be true. It requires reality to be false. So of course, everything that sprouts from it is also based on falsehood.
That's right.
It has to be,
and it needs
it's rotten at the core.
It needs to use these euphemisms and this coded language. You know.
It does in 2019 because we've done exactly enough damage that it's not fashionable anymore.
Exactly.
So you have to find a way to euphemize it.
Yeah. And it's pathetic. I've got to say, I find it unfathomably pathetic, especially with regards to things like Star Wars, like video games and whatnot. What I love about these franchises, though, at the moment, even when I'm not that big a fan of them, like Star Wars, I don't really care that much. It's pushing back.
Yeah.
Because the writers generally are going to be kind of left-leaning. They are going to be people who are a little bit cleverer. Sorry. You know? So of course they're going to push back. Of course they're going to push back, and they're going to use the medium against you. And you know what? If you want something different, if you want your franchise that appeals and directly to you, fucking write it. Don't tell other people what they can write about. Fuck you.
Yeah, and good luck getting it made, because it'll be a pile of shit.
Exactly, it'll be a pile of crap. So, you know.
But I do find the other thing I find interesting about that is just the notion that these, because I think about the 30-year cycle, which of course applies to the mythology of it, and also applies to. But Star Wars, but it's the idea that each generation has to fight this fight again. That's something I keep coming back to, because that's one of the things that the new Star Wars movies are explicitly about. They're about, like, you know, the next generation's got to, because guess what, fascism's back.
That's
kids,
right,
because it always comes back.
And it's also about puncturing what came before. You know, all the stuff that you thought was good and that you thought was absolute, actually not so much. You know.
Well, here's the thing: you thought you'd beaten it, but you didn't. So that means something about your approach was wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that's a big part of what's going on a little bit in The Force Awakens and an awful lot in The Last Jedi is about figuring out, like, what's good about what you did before? What do you need to carry forward? But what do you need to leave behind?
What do you need to learn from?
Yeah, what was broken? What didn't work? How was the victory incomplete? How do we end up in a situation where the shit is coming back again,
Yeah, right.
and we have to fight it again? What do we have to do differently? There is no way the Last Skywalker is going to fucking address that, because it's JJ and he's not.
Yeah,
So
it's not his thing, is it? I mean, don't get me
But
wrong.
I love that The Last Jedi at least asks the fucking question, and it does it with fucking Yoda of all people.
Yeah, right.
Which made me want to cry with happiness when Yoda was like, yeah, actually, we kind of fucked things up a bit, didn't we?
Yeah, so the
weren't
mouthpiece of
perfect.
the Jedi, you know, like the
Magic.
the very icon of the ancient Jedi, essentially. Yeah, I think it's cool. I think
But true wisdom is you keep fucking learning.
Yeah.
That's what's great about it, and that's why it works coming out of Yoda, because he's the avatar of wisdom. And for Yoda to come back and say like, hey, yeah, younger Yoda, yeah, he was wrong about some shit too. That's brilliant.
That is brilliant. It's really, really clever. But for me, I mean, the fundamental problem I have is this notion of ownership. It's the notion that these franchises are somehow territories that certain demographics have somehow laid claim to, and have to defend from all comers, as though no one else has a place in them. You know, they're not yours. You didn't create them. Even when you create them, once it's out there, it's out there. It toddles off and becomes its own thing. Any creator worth their salt knows that, you know? It
Absolutely.
doesn't belong to you, you entitled little prick. Okay? That's really what I want to say to them. It's just like, you know, I don't even want to argue. I just want to slap them. You know, it's just...
Yeah, and the other thing that's really funny about that for me is, like, on the left there's a whole understanding of that, because, like, I mean, you know, this is the Harry Potter books, you know, whether you like them or not,
Which I don't.
there's some pretty serious fucking issues with them,
Yeah.
right? There's ways in which they're quite reactionary. There's some actually really troubling use of stereotypes and stuff like that. But the thing about them is, like, you know, the left gets this. There's a massive, massive Harry Potter fan fiction community.
Yeah.
Where people take those toys and reimagine it so it fits more with what they want it to be, and they fill out the characters, they do all kinds of fun stuff. Yeah, some of it's shit, some of it's great, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The point is it's this creative endeavour, right? And you can engage with it or not. If you just want to read the books and never know about it, you don't have to, but there's a whole universe of shit out there if you want to get involved. Doctor Who's the same.
Yep. Oh.
Massive fan community, producing fan work all the time. All the right's got is fucking complaints.
Yeah.
There's no creativity coming from them.
No, you're absolutely
There's no
right.
like, you know, where's the Star Wars reactionary fanfic?
Right.
Nowhere, because it would be a complete pile of shit.
Because it would be crap.
worthless.
No one would want it. No one would
Right.
want it. And also, it would just be bad. It would just be like on a technical level, it would be bad. As almost, I mean, I look at people who are luminaries of the right from ages past, people like Ayn Rand and whatnot. Terrible.
Yeah.
I do not understand on a technical level how anyone can look at Ayn Rand's work and say that it's good. I just don't. And that's not because of my political biases. That's on a purely technical level. It is unreadable.
Well, I think to go back to something we started on, I think if you're exactly the right age, I think if you're old enough to be able to read all the words and young enough not to understand what they all mean, I really do. I think if it hits you at just the wrong age, I can imagine it being like a whoa.
Yeah.
Because it's back to that thing of, like, if you've not really engaged with philosophy before, it's literally, then you're going to have your mind a bit blown.
So you're
by it.
not going to understand that it's poorly read Nietzsche.
Yeah,
You're not
but
going
that's
to
only
understand that.
That's only going to survive and perpetuate if you never read another fucking philosophy book
That's
in your
right,
life.
yeah. Or
as soon as you
even-
read your second, third, or fourth, then you'll be like, oh,
That's
hang on.
it. Even like when you start reading Nietzsche himself, you'll realise that actually what this woman has done has taken his philosophy, profoundly misinterpreted it, and it's sort of marketed it as her own, without even recognising the inherent problems of Nietzsche, and there are plenty. You know?
Right, well, that's it. Is not that Nietzsche's unproblematic, right? But at least start with the source material and understand what's going on.
At least it's coherent. I mean, Nietzsche's philosophies are coherent. I'll give them that. They are coherent,
Absolutely.
and it makes sense when you read them what his perspectives are. Rand, it's all over the place. It's all over the bloody shop. It's so inherently contradictory and antithetical to reality That's the problem. Totally antithetical to reality. Even her own lived reality, under her own
Yeah.
philosophies, she wouldn't be allowed to live in society. It's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. Um,
Yeah.
that said, there's still loads of people who, like grown-ass people, who've never read another philosophy book in their lives.
Well,
Um,
grown-ass members of the American Congress who right now are
mhm.
seem to be intent on driving us to hell in a
Yeah,
handcart as
right.
fast as they possibly humanly fucking can, and it's because the Rand's the only fucking book they've ever
Yeah.
read of that
Well,
length.
the reason they like her is because she justifies them. It's the
Yeah,
reason they
exactly.
like her. It's not got anything to do with any wider philosophy, because her wider philosophies are self-evidently crap.
No, it's
Um,
it's post hoc rationalization for what they wanted to do in the
that's
first place.
exactly it. That's exactly what it is. It's like the misreadings of Machiavelli. You know, people don't
You know what's
understand. They don't
y-
understand Machiavelli. They don't understand the context. They read it as though it's an instruction manual.
the most elemental thing people get wrong about Machiavelli? It's the most famous quote. Everyone says it's better to be feared than to be loved. That's the second part. The first
It's
sentence says it's better to be loved than
yeah,
feared. Like they miss that, and
yeah.
without that context, you're just left with this. Because it's better to be it's better to be feared than like. Well, you
Mhm.
know, it's like if you can't be both, it's better to be
But they
feared than to
also
be
miss
loved.
the wider
It's
context of The
like
Prince. It was never meant to be read as an instruction manual. It was a comedy. It was a satire.
yeah, there's that
It's
too.
a
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
satire. It's
there's
not
yeah,
designed to be literal, but people they have issues with interpreting it, and that's what happens. It's bizarrely common. It's like you get it to a lesser degree with Dante. People read Dante's
yeah,
Inferno, and they think that it's like this religiously fundamentalist text about literally going to hell. It is so not. You need to get a copy of Dante's Inferno with really good notes.
yeah,
Like the book again in note form. You need that because the context for the imagery that Allegory uses, you need to know it to understand it. And you know what? Underneath like the sort of the visual horror of how graphic the levels of hell are, it's
mm.
really bloody funny. Because 90% of the time, do you know what he's doing? He's having a go at people he knows. There's a
Nice,
reason why particular characters turn up in particular levels of hell. He's kind of
right?
exploring the politics of his era, his own political persuasions, using religious imagery, but also commenting upon like the social arenas that he used to operate in. So you get people Dante probably knew turning up in certain levels of hell because they have these qualities. It's kind of funny. But people
Yeah,
don't get that.
no,
They don't get it. It's an odd thing. It's a problem with exegesis that we have in our present day cultures, which is the interpretations of texts. It's the fact that allegory and metaphor is everywhere, and
well, and it's just a chronic inability to contextualize.
yeah,
It's just an assumption that everything gets produced in a vacuum.
everything's fucking literal. That's what
Yeah,
bothers me. Everything is fucking literal, and you can't read stuff like Barker. You can't read The Thief of Always like that and appreciate it to the full degree. You know, it's like all
sure.
Barker's book. It swells and it becomes bigger and grander and more beautiful the more you read it. And of course, reading it as an adult, I imagine, is a very different experience from reading it as a child. I imagine it's more literal as a child.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Barker's work is it works on both levels. That's
Yeah,
why it's
that's
brilliant.
why it's so
I mean,
good. Yeah.
you can enjoy it on a literal level, and you will, and it will be a rollicking adventure. And then, as you say, and then I can sit down for 2.5 hours and pull The Thief of Always apart, and we've still got more to say about what's going on under the hood.
Yeah.
Because guess what? A lot's
A
going on under the
lot,
hood.
and this is technically, I would argue, one of Barker's simplest stories as well.
No, it absolutely is. Yeah.
I mean, you've read Imagica, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
We are gonna have to do that.
We are.
I
Yeah, I'm
mean,
gonna have to reread it because it's
would
been 20 years.
if you've
but yeah.
got if we've got the time and the space, would you like to do it as like a Christmas episode?
That'd be cool.
Yeah, so one
Yeah,
we
that'd be
can
fun.
release on Christmas, not do on Christmas, obviously, because I'll be
Sure,
drunk.
sure.
I'm afraid.
Whereas I, of course, will be sober as a judge, as I always am.
No, I will. I will
Um,
be on the sofa with a bottle of port. I don't drink often, but Christmas. Yeah, the
yeah,
Christmas
fair enough.
period, I drink a lot. Don't know why. Just seems to be the season, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, given the themes, I think it would work well. You know, the Christ metaphors and whatnot, and the fact that you've got like the guy who may in fact be Christ in it.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, that could work.
that could be fun.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, and it'll be fun because I remember so little
Oh
about
my
it, and
god!
I
So
have.
you're gonna have to reread it.
No, I am going to have to reread
Oh
it absolutely
fuck!
because I've reread Weave World
Yeah.
and Great and Secret Show and and Imagica, and I read them all at the same period, and
Right.
most of my memories of those two, I realised with Imagica I've got very very vague. I remember the opening conceit of people who only can remember the last 10 years of their
Yeah, which
life,
is an
and I remember
awesome
thinking
one, isn't it?
that's fucking brilliant.
Yeah, I know,
And
right?
I remember one of the early sex scenes with one of those people
That
for
would
fairly obvious
most
reasons.
likely be gentle because he's quite rampant.
Yeah, and I remember Pyopa, obviously.
Obviously, who
'Cause
can't
holy shit.
who can't remember Pyopa? It's just a brilliant character.
And the other thing I remember is just some impressionistic things about the finale and about how it's this amazing twin track narrative where you've got these two
Yeah.
huge,
It's
it's one of those where the balance of power shifts.
it's
You know,
you know how
chapter to chapter.
metaphysically epic Barker's books are.
Yeah,
Forget them.
this is the
This
one.
is
Isn't
this
it?
is the one. I mean, it's-
The funny thing is, I remember it as my favourite of the three
Yeah.
as well. So it's very interesting that that's my memory, even though my memory of the narrative is incredibly
that
patchy.
is
So, no,
interesting. That is interesting.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to a revisit.
It's big, and it's actually quite hard to digest. There's a lot going on in that book.
Yeah, but you know, it's Barker, so it's easy to read. I mean, that's the thing.
It is.
Like,
It is. I mean,
yeah.
I reread it recently, and it's fucking enormous.
yeah.
It's like beyond Lord of the Rings enormous, but it is so readable.
Yeah, it zips along. I mean, that's the thing I think for me, that's the quality that Barker and King do share, is that simple, like, just sentence level.
Yeah,
It just zips
but
along.
for different reasons as well. I mean, I
Yeah.
find the reason King is so readable is because it's like having a chat to someone at a bar.
Yeah,
It's so colloquial
Yeah.
that you can just read something like of the scale of it, and it's gone. It evaporates
Yeah.
around you, and suddenly you've like read 400 pages, and it's like X o'clock in the morning. Barker, it's the poetry I find
Yeah.
with Barker. It's the lyricism. He's got such a poetic turn of phrase, and he's so acutely aware of rhythm.
Yeah, but Barker's also really well paced.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Weave World's a big book, but a shitload happens in
God,
it.
so much happens. It's
And that's the thing. It's like, you know, it's long, but it doesn't outstay its welcome. It doesn't outstay its welcome
Not
because
at
it's
all.
full of event. It's full of moment.
Well, I think
you
this
know?
is it. I mean, even like a lot of Barker's books from that period are massive. They're
Yeah.
really big books, but they don't feel like big books at all.
That's
There's
right.
so much going on in them, and every sequence is fun and interesting, and there's profundity, and there's weirdness, and there's sex, and there's all sorts of wonderful stuff happening. It doesn't matter. And Imagica is the most epic of them. I mean, not
Right.
only in terms of size, but just the sheer profundity of ideas.
That's what I remember is the scale of it. In the cosmic sense,
Yeah.
the scale of it.
Well,
that I do remember.
it's existential. It's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah, yeah.
massive. This book. I mean, compared to it, Weave World is quite colloquial.
Yeah. That's my recall, and that's again. I think that's probably why I liked Imagica so much. I think it spoke to a kind of. I think the scale of it spoke to me as a teenager. So.
I find it staggering when I read it.
Yeah.
You know, the ideas kind of knock me on my ass
Yeah.
whenever I read it. And then it's like, as a writer, it's the technical qualities of it. It's the fact that he's got this cast and these ideas and this narrative and all of these concepts, and he wields them so elegantly. It's like,
Yeah.
you bastard. You utter impossible bastard. How do you do it?
And he sat down and did it by hand,
Right.
with no planning.
And with like umpteen million dead drafts. Because
Yeah,
that's how he
right,
writes.
Ugh.
I don't know. I don't know how he does it. When I read books like Imagica, I'm like, that's an impossible thing.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is impossible. That book shouldn't exist. And yet it does. And it's
There it is.
And I've still not read anything like it.
Okay, you've convinced me. I'll add it to the list.
Yeah, we need to do Sacrament as well at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what? Why don't we just say that at some point we're going to have to do Barker's back catalogue and probably King's too.
And Kings as well. Yeah, certainly most of it. Yeah, I think that's
barring the little weird stuff that nobody knows about, you know.
Yeah.
Let's just say that. Yeah.
No, that would be cool.
And be done with it.
I think that's right. I mean, I think that it's funny enough the King one that came to my mind because it came up in the parents and children thing. Panel that we did was Eyes of the Dragon. Which,
wow, yeah, I haven't read that for a long time.
No, me either. And it hadn't even crossed my imagination in maybe 15 years. But obviously they were talking about the role of parents and children in fantasy, and it suddenly bubbled up. I was like, oh, of course.
Yeah, right. I know it feeds into the Dark Tower, obviously. So it's
yes, of course it does. Yeah, quite a central way.
Well, Flag is in it, you know. He's
our man,
main character. So it's King's like one of his earlier diversions into fantasy fiction. So,
but it's really, I love the story behind it. He wrote it for his daughter.
Yeah,
who
right.
Just wouldn't read his horror story. I mean, obviously both of the boys did because they've grown up to become novelists in their own right. But she was like, "I love you, Daddy, but I don't need the monsters."
I don't like that. Yeah. Have you read his other fantasy stuff like the Talisman and whatnot?
No, I haven't read the Talisman.
Oh, Talisman's great.
Okay.
Talisman's a really beautiful story, and its sequel, Black House.
They're the co-author ones with Stroud.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Black House is very good. I really enjoyed Black House, and can be read on its own, but is better if you have the context of the Talisman.
Sure. No, I'll give it a go.
Again,
I'll take the recommendation.
Big book. Yeah. Like really breeze block huge.
Sure.
But excellent. And it's what I love about King when he gets out of his comfort zone and he starts writing stuff that's a bit weird and a bit metaphysical. You know what? I think he's timid about it. I really do, but he's good.
Yeah,
he's good at it.
Maybe he's a sort of, maybe he's a bit self-conscious.
I think he is. I've read interviews where he has talked about being a little bit self-conscious about that stuff, you know, about the weirder stuff, about the metaphysical stuff, and it's a shame because he's actually really good.
Yeah, I think he's good at it.
When he gets on the weird train, you know, he can go there. He can be as hallucinogenic, as surreal, as bizarre as Barker is, you know.
Yeah, well, that's what that's one of the things I love about the very maligned kind of final book of it. I think that he really, when he tears the lid off it and just goes for it with the deadlights and the ritual, I fucking love it. I think it is batshit, but it's fucking one. I mean, I remember we actually had a conversation, didn't we, in the comments under the conversation about it chapter 2, like how do you film that final conference? And I realized as I was talking about it, like actually you go animated. You know, if you're making a movie, you go, because there's no way to do it
literally
in like a physical, literal representation. You have to go symbolic because it's the whole thing is fucking nuts.
Well, it's,
but I love all that. I love the turtle and fucking.
It's like that, isn't it? I mean, in the book, it's like that. It's weird. It's strange. It's highly visual. It's hallucinogenic. It feels very like a drug trip.
Yeah, exactly. So just fucking lean into
it actually feels very legitimately like hallucinating on certain substances. And he's quite good at that. You know, I mean, well, for obvious reasons. You know, I mean, it's first-hand experience, isn't it? You know, but he is good at it, and I wish he'd do more. I wish he'd do. It's one of the reasons why I wasn't that fond of Doctor Sleep. You know, the book.
Right.
It just didn't do it for me because it's not. I don't think it's badly written. It's not at all. I mean, it's very readable.
No, sure.
It's just that it's too old-fashioned for me. You know, it's too the greatest hits of.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, it's a really interesting thing. I feel like one of the things that's happening is he's feeling a need to revisit. I mean, as I say, I mean, we talked about it before, didn't we? I think for me, I don't really. The reason I love Doctor Sleep is, and I do love it, is because I just love getting to visit Danny. I don't really care about the story. What I care about is Danny, the alcoholic.
God, he's in a right old state, isn't he?
Yeah, and you know, finding a way to land, you know, finding a way to bring that home, and I think that for me was really. I've just found that so moving. Yeah, he's in a bit of an old place, isn't he, in Doctor Sleep? Oh, he's in a rough place at the start. And it just, again, it's the metatextual thing of knowing, like, you know, I mean, again, you got to remember when King wrote The Shining, he was a functioning alcoholic with a
Yeah,
young
right.
family. That was his darkest fears in the pages of that book about what could I become.
Yeah, quite self-aware as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Quite
that
self-aware.
absolute terror of like, what if I get drunk enough to get angry enough to hurt one of my
Yeah,
kids?
right.
That's like, it's really bleak stuff.
To exercise that through writing is really quite clever. It's
Well, but then, you cut to Doctor Sleep, which is whatever it is, 30, 35 years later, and his own son, Joe Hill's grown up and had to go into rehab and,
yeah, which is
had,
not uncommon. I mean, it's,
Right.
drug dependency and alcohol addiction and whatnot do tend to run in families.
Right, absolutely. Whether that's learned behavior or genetics, kind of irrelevant.
It's all
just-
over.
it's something-
Yeah, it just
it's
is a
something that
pattern.
happens.
It's something that happens. So.
Right. And it felt like, I mean, Doctor Sleep to me felt like an exorcism in a way of that whole thing. And as I say, it sounds like a stupid thing to say. I didn't really care about the plot. I mean, it was fine. The villains were fine, and the story was fine. I enjoyed it. It was fine, but it wasn't what I came for.
You came for Danny, yeah?
What I got out of it was Danny. What I got out of it was that journey. And that moment where he sees his father at the end was just, I mean, that did get me. That did get me. Because I actually don't, I'm not as sympathetic to Jack Torrance as Stephen King is. I actually think he's kind of a shit. But I loved that moment. I thought that was something very, very sweet indeed about that.
The redemptive
very kind of
moment.
powerful. Yeah, it was lovely.
I'm looking forward to the film. I am looking forward to the film because I hope they do with it what Kubrick did with The Shining.
Well, I think the film looks the book looks like the book was a sequel to the book The Shining. The film looks like a sequel to the film The Shining. So Christ knows what they're going to do with it.
If they do it right, if they do it
well,
I mean that could be amazing. That could be amazing.
I mean he goes back to the Overlook, right? Clearly, that's all over the trailers. So
I mean that place. Because I like the film better than the book. I really do like the film of The Shining way better than the book. That place has such power in my imagination. It's so disturbing. Because I saw it when I was probably too young to see it. Like most things. And I can remember being fixated by it, by that film. And the images of like the corridors and the emptiness of it. And that emptiness being threatening in and of itself.
It's funny you say that. I'm just thinking about going back to the Joker movie for a second. Like the moment at the beginning where you get the red, black and white Warner Brothers logo, the old 80s Warner Brothers logo. My first memory on seeing that is The Shining.
It's The Shining, that leads into right.
Yeah, and that red, really imprints on your imagination. Like, shit.
Actually,
because obviously red's a key color in that movie.
It's funny you should mention it, but like The Shining, the images of The Shining are so indelibly imprinted in my memory because we had it on VHS.
Right, of course.
I remember it was just like black and it said The Shining in red, and you had like Jack's face in the T, like really frightening looking. And I remember watching it with my mum, as these things tend to go, and it having a really powerful effect. I wasn't like scared as a child often is by films where it's like, it made me cry or anything like that. I just remember the images, like implanting, as they do when you're that young, just the images just going and just searing into my mind. That's what I remember.
Yeah.
And then recurring, like again and again and again and again, as they do, when your imagination is still taking stuff in, when it's still assimilating stuff. It's brilliant. I mean, that's why I love the film, because it's there, it's in my head, in a very profound way.
Yeah.
And it's just wonderful. I mean, it's just a technically brilliant work. It's one of those revisits every year,
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It's a stunt. I mean, I think it was a couple of years ago now. I caught it at the BFI on the IMAX screen.
Oh, but that was so good.
Oh, it was fucking amazing. It was a double bill. It was that and Carrie.
Oh, brilliant.
Carrie first, and then the show, which is the right order.
Jeez, that.
But yeah, that was fucking great.
Oh, I'd love to do that. I would love to do that. The only film, like classic horror film, I caught on the big screen again when it was re-aired was Alien.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
it's fucking brilliant. I mean that Alien is one of my like gun to head top 5 films ever made.
Sure.
Possibly top 3. you know. And to see it, I've had this conversation with my mother a lot. It's like one of the things I absolutely envy her is being like a kid or a teenager when this stuff was at the cinema.
Yeah.
And when it was a phenomena that wasn't culturally entrenched, when everyone didn't know like the imagery of the chest burster and the face hugger and all of that, when it wasn't like the subject of comedy routines and whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, The Shining, man. My
Well,
God.
I mean, that's got to be one of the most parodied films in existence, surely.
Yeah.
Surely
Absolutely.
it's got to be. But can you? I just can't get myself into the headspace of seeing that for the first time and not knowing what was going to happen.
And there's a thing, isn't there? We were the VHS generation, and the advantage that gave us was we could watch it over and over and over
Yes.
again, and we could rewind and we could freeze frame, and obviously there was a value to that. It was incredible, and I certainly think that part of my kind of my ability to obsess about movies comes from the fact that I grew up in an era where it was easy to obsess about movies. If you watched a movie and you liked it, you could just watch it again. Watch it straight away.
And we often did.
Quite indeed. But the trade-off we had that the next generation hasn't is that we watched them on VHS, and what that meant was we watched them on 4.3 aspect ratio, pan and scan, and not very good sound a lot of the time. So although we watched the movies and we loved them, but there was a thing. I mean, for me, and I hate saying this because I sound like a wanker, but when I saw The Shining on the big, it was a revelation to see it on an IMAX screen. Because most of my memories of watching it will be VHS or off the telly, and you do miss stuff.
Of course, yeah, of
because
course.
Kubrick used the entire frame. I mean, he's kind of known for it.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
It's just
so
the scale of it.
yeah, it's an interesting experience seeing them in a different format, isn't it? And just seeing like what you just didn't notice when you were watching them on VHS or whatever.
There's some of that, but there's also the scale of it. I mean, what I realised with The Shining was the abiding impression I was left with from the cinema viewing, which I hadn't had from watching it on telly, was it felt like the camera was a window.
Yeah.
It felt like I was looking into the world of The Shining through a window the whole way through.
So it's kind of like there's a voyeuristic element to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is massively uncomfortable, isn't it?
Really interesting, yeah.
It's
really interesting.
It's the same thing that the director of The Witch did. You know, that has that feeling, and it's massively uncomfortable. Where you are sort of watching this family go slightly mad together, and you feel like, I should not be watching this. This is peering through windows, you know, it's not normal, it's not a pleasant thing to do. Brilliant thing to, like, emotion to evoke.
I mean, in The Shining, it's almost like you're one of the ghosts in a hotel.
Yeah, that's... we're going to have to do an episode.
You know what I mean?
We're going to have to do an episode on this, I think, Kit, because it's a rabbit hole, that one.
Yeah, okay.
It's a rabbit.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, maybe the thing to do will be to get Jack back.
Oh, does he like...
The Shining's his favourite movie of all time, The
Shining.
Well, he's always happy to talk about it.
I can definitely see why. I can see why. It's one for me. It's one of the texts for haunted house films. Right. You know, even though it is questionable, even if it is a haunted house film. But then again, the other films that I consider to be the texts are like that too. The original 1963 Haunting.
Right.
There's likely nothing supernatural in it. There's nothing overtly supernatural in it. It could or just be these characters going mad together. And also The Innocents, the adaptation of The Turn of the Screw, which is distressing. It's got all the implications of the original book, and I'm really surprised that it goes there.
Right.
Because it's dark. There are implications of very uncomfortable relationships with children in that book that are like...
Right, okay.
When I read it for the first time, I was like, it isn't implying that, is it? And then you realise that it is, and you're like, wow, that's... Yeah, that's unpleasant. Thanks.
Thanks, book.
Wonderful. But yeah, we will have to definitely get into that at some point. Okay. But can I pencil in Imagica at some point?
No, absolutely. It's on the
list. Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Well, ladies and gents, that was... I mean, I think we may have exhausted that one, Kit. I think we may have exhausted that one. That was, it was The Thief of Always, but it was loads of other stuff too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is the best way with these podcasts. I like it when they go like this. It's bonus material. It surprises you. That's what it is.
Yeah.
We like to keep you on your toes. We like to do, ironically, what Barker does, which is sort of almost bait and switch. There's a slight element of that to it. We draw you in, and then we actually start talking about other stuff.
Look, I really do. I think The Thief of Always is one of those because it's drawn as an elemental like fairy tale at its core. You know, the conversation was always going to branch off in a bunch of different directions because the narrative has so many of those seeds within it.
It's Barker. You can't help it. He's an ideas-driven author. He's ideas-driven primarily. It's one of the reasons why I still marvel at the fact that he has a popular career. Yeah. You know, that he became a popular writer. I still can't fathom that because he is so much cleverer than a lot of people that are operating in the same strata. You know, he deals with so many different ambiguities and so many different ideas and concepts, and his stories operate on such deep layers. It baffles my mind. It boggles my mind that a popular audience respond to his material. I love the fact they do.
But it's because he's clever, but he's not a snob,
Yeah.
and he writes intelligently, but he doesn't write
alienatingly,
unnecessarily densely.
Yeah.
He doesn't write to sate his own ego about how fucking
No,
clever
you're right.
he is.
Yeah, absolutely. He wants to change the world.
He wants to be understood. Yeah. He wants to be enjoyed. You know, he doesn't want people to think that they're too stupid to understand it. He wants people to get it. You know?
That's it. He's one of the most activist writers I've ever read. He really doesn't see the point in doing anything unless you're trying to change the world. I think that's a truism of his work. And I agree. I totally agree. I don't see the point either.
No, absolutely, and that's the thing. I mean, again, and that's the thing I get from Barker and King is that thing about like that. You know, not all populism is bad. Actually,
No.
if you're writing to reach the widest possible audience, just because you want to reach the widest, you want as many people as possible to be able to enjoy what you do. That's no bad thing.
No, not at all. That's actually a very, very noble thing. I mean, if you actually want to change the world, you've got to reach enough people to do it. You know, that's a thing. And don't.
But also, look, with both of them, you don't have to compromise your vision to do it. That's the lesson. That's the great lesson of Barker in particular, right?
Yeah.
You can be as wild as you fucking like. As long as you got the chops, you can go as crazy as you want. People will come with you.
Yeah, they will, and they really will.
Yep.
People read Barker who would never read like much denser, sort of more dry academical texts, and when they will get ideas and concepts and philosophies that they may be otherwise would never have touched with a 10-foot pole. It's all there. It broadens people's minds in the most beautiful and wonderful ways. And what I love is he taps into the appetite for it. People want it. People do want it. They want to be challenged. They want to have something that doesn't talk to them like they're fucking idiots. As the success of the Joker film does demonstrate.
Yeah, there you go, kids. It can be done.
It can be done. It's really difficult, and it takes a hell of a lot of work. I mean, it's a tightrope because there's always going to be a lot of Barker in me as an imaginer and as a writer because he was the one that inspired me to do it. It's always going to be there, and I have kind of similar ambitions. You've read my stuff. You know what it's like.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do too. I want to change the world and reality through what I write.
Yeah.
I think one of the major differences is I don't think I can write as in the same popular vein as Barker can. I think my work's always going to be alienating. I just think it is, because it's so fucking weird.
Let's go with polarizing rather than alienating, right? Because those of us that dig it, we dig it.
Yeah, right. I mean,
we are out here.
They do exist. They do exist.
Yeah,
I've had it reinforced a few times recently, which has been lovely. It's been really nice, but I'm always very aware of the fact that when I kick something out there are going to be people who fucking hate it.
Hey, look, but there are people who fucking hate Barker too.
Yeah,
okay?
absolutely, there are. Bloody hell!
I've
read some of the excoriations of of Barker's work, and I
Yeah.
disagree profoundly, obviously. For the most
Yeah,
part,
yeah, yeah.
for the most part, there are some things that you know are worthy of excoriation. I've written some of them
Yeah.
myself, but for the most part, as we said in the Weave World, it's one of the most unassailable bodies of work I've ever come across.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Barker's, especially his 80s output, you put that up against anyone else, any field, any
Jesus
decade of
Christ.
work.
Can you, I mean,
Good luck.
I always put Barker up against someone like, say, Dean Koontz. And you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you came out of the same decade and indeed are affiliated within the same sort of subgenres. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
how
yeah.
does that work?
No, I know. And I mean, and they, look, peak Kuntz's good times. I'm not, there's some really enjoyable stuff there.
There's some decent ideas. He always
No, there
loses
is. There's some
interest.
fun. There's some fun stuff. You'll have a good time, but it's just next level.
It's just not on the same level at all.
No.
I mean, it's just not. But it's fascinating, isn't it? You will see them on the same shelves. You'll see them
Yeah.
like affiliated, and I find that really weird. I find that really strange. But there we go. There we are.
But you know what? On the subject though of people being hungry to be stretched and the enjoyable, so I finished reading it to Scarlett.
Yeah.
And she said that was brilliant.
Yes.
That was really
Got
brilliant.
another
I
one.
was like, yeah, I know.
You're gonna have to gradually introduce her to the other Barker stuff as she grows
Well, I'm gonna,
up.
yeah. No, but here's the punchline. Here's what you're like. Here's how brilliant it was. The next night, I went up and we started reading the next book. And at the end, I put it down and said, "Okay, it's time to go to sleep. You can read for 20 minutes by yourself." And she just picked up the Thief of Always and said, "Can I read this?"
Brilliant. Brilliant.
And she's now rereading it literally straight away. She's rereading it to herself.
So we've got another one. It's brilliant. It's like
Job
get 'em
done,
young,
man.
It's like the smoking industry or the Catholic Church, you get them young.
Only we're a force for
We're
good,
a force
just
for
to be clear.
absolute good in that regard. Barker's
look,
not going to damage anyone. Barker's going to, or if he does damage you, it's in the most wonderful way.
In the best possible
Yeah.
way. No, look, and here's the thing, though. This is the first book she's ever reread.
Oh, it's brilliant.
So how's
That's
that?
brilliant. That is the most wonderful thing.
That'll do, won't it?
Yeah, I'm really pleased. It makes me so happy that there are
Yeah, me too,
younger
man. It's
generations
great.
being introduced to this stuff. It really does. I can
Yeah.
imagine her, like, in a few years' time picking up something like Weave World, and
Absolutely.
just...
Well, I mean, the fuse is lit now.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, and it is.
Yeah.
It is the kind of book where I think it's probably because I read it when I was I read it when I was 11, which is ridiculously young.
Right.
But as a teenager, I think Weave World it's just one of those books that's going to change your outlook.
No,
It's going to
absolutely.
change the world for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's back to what we were talking about earlier on about that thing about being a kid because everything's new, and I think even when you're a teenager, there's still new experiences waiting for you, and if you're not, I mean, there's not a lot like Weave World out there anyway, but it really will just blow the doors
Yeah, well,
off.
for me,
really will just-
it altered my
Yeah.
perceptions. It was like taking a drug.
Yeah.
It was. It was like there are periods of reading that book where my brain was on fire.
Well, and here's the thing, though, you're still on that
Yeah,
drug. Like, here we are.
ridden the wave of it. It's always been there. It's so weird. It's such an odd experience to, it is so. About because you've had it with your own inspirations and whatnot. You've
Absolutely.
had that experience, but it's so weird, isn't it? For that fire to still be burning.
Yeah. But I don't know. I just think that's the good stuff. The good stuff gets you. And what's been nice again, just to bring it full circle as we're closing up here. What's really exciting about going to see something like the Joker movie and feeling that the fire's still there. Like over 40 years old now, I'm still capable of sitting down in front of a screen or picking up a book and having my mind completely
That's
fucking
wonderful.
blown. That's how wonderful is that? Like it's not. Because it turns out, not everything has been done. It turns out there are still ways to surprise. There are still ways to shock.
That's
and
refreshing.
enliven
It's
and-
lovely.
Yeah, it is.
That is really cool. And it's lovely to have that. Whenever you read this stuff, it still evokes the same feeling of surprise, even when you know it inside out, as I do. I can quote vast lengths of some of the Barker books, I can tell you.
Sure.
They surprise me every year. Every year that I read, I
Yeah.
read them once a year every year.
And they're still stuff, but they're just so fucking
Yeah.
good, aren't they? That's why. And there's always some hidden gem or some moment you forgot,
Yep.
some turn of phrase.
Something
that
you just weren't sophisticated enough to notice before.
right when it just comes out at you, and you're like, oh yeah,
It's and long may that continue. You know,
Yeah,
long may
absolutely.
that
Yeah,
continue. I hope I continue doing it until I cannot. You know,
absolutely.
until it's impossible.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's the Thief of Always, ladies and gents. Introduce it
there
to
it
your
is.
children. You know, please do.
Yeah,
Please
absolutely.
do.
And it is, yeah, it's suitable for it's suitable for a bright 9-year-old.
Yeah.
It's not going to give them
It's
nightmares.
not. No, I mean it does have some imagery that's really quite dark, and some concepts that are quite dark actually,
Yeah,
and maybe distressing for a child, but not in a bad way.
absolutely.
Not in any bad way. It will engage. It will inspire them. I'm sure most kids who like reading, who like stories, will get a lot out of it.
Absolutely.
Surprise, Clive Barker, the children's author. Um, so, Kit, is there anything you would like to pimp out whilst we're here?
Oh, I think just the usual greatest
Yep.
hits.
Talking
If you,
Robocop.
yeah, absolutely. Oh God, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Talking Robocop's come back.
Mhm.
So Jack Graham's brought out of retirement. Talking Robocop with Kit Power, episode 20 just dropped on the usual feed. So that's my podcast. So yeah, go check that out. If you want to buy my fiction work, Amazon.co.uk. Go to books, search for Kit Power. I have an author page there. So everything I've been published under my name's there, including recent releases. The book with Midnight movie monographs, Tommy, and the Black Shark published The Finite.
Finite, yes, well worth your
which is
time.
still out there breaking hearts,
Yeah.
which is
Expect
lovely to hear.
an episode on that at some point.
Oh yeah, we were going to catch up.
Yeah,
Weren't we?
we will have a chat about that definitely.
Good. No, that'd be. I'd like to do that. I'd be eager to do that. So yeah, if you want to get the paperbacks in those cases, go to the publishers and buy them directly from the publisher. It won't cost you any more, and they'll get more money, and so will I. So that's worth doing. Ebooks, it's got to be Amazon because it's Amazon, and they just rule ebooks, and that's
the way it
is what it is.
I'm afraid.
Yeah. So that's that. If you want my non-fiction works, almost everything I write that's non-fiction goes to Ginger Nuts of Horror, including a forthcoming 4,000-word essay on the Joker movie, which will be appearing on Ginger Nuts of Horror in the next couple of weeks.
Brilliant.
But if you want that right now, if you want that tonight, I will be posting it to my Patreon backers. And if you back me on Patreon for a little as $1 a month, you'll get something new from me every week, whether that's a piece of fiction, non-fiction review, 4,000-word essay on the Joker, or podcast material. Something new every week, $1 a month. And as I say, tonight it will be the 4,000-word Joker essay, which I'm just going to touch up and put up there. So yeah,
Superb stuff.
that's
Brilliant. As for myself, you can find me, as always, knocking about here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel, where you'll find all sorts of stuff, including What the Hell is Wrong with Us. You can find my work at Ginger Nuts of Horror as well. You'll find lots of different articles and essays and reviews and things. You can find my fiction at strangeplaygrounds.com. There are links to all of my short story collections there, including Born in Blood Volume 1, which I'm very, 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 very proud of. And you can also find me at the Twitter feed Enigmatic Elegy. And I think that's it for me. Kit, as per usual, thank you so much. It's been a blast.
Oh, thank you.
Been a blast.
Yeah, great conversation.
As always. And thank you guys for listening to us for what is probably quite a long time for this one.
3 hours
Quite
by my
a long
recording.
one. Yeah, brilliant. Until next time, bye-bye.